And we are live. What's up, guys? Welcome to Money Monday. We are here with the legend himself, George Gammon. Let's get into it, baby. Go. And we are live. What's up, guys? Welcome to FreshandFit Podcast. It's Money Monday. We got George Gammon in the house. Quick announcement before we get into the show, guys. Number one, patreon.com/FreshFit. It's where you get all the exclusive behind-the-scenes content that no one else has.
Yep.
Of us kicking out annoying girls, doing Zoom calls,
double dates,
whatever else you want to check out, man. Whether it's womanizing, making money, or getting girls, or Instagram, or getting in shape. We got you on Patreon, patreon.com/FreshFit. Also, we're on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. Chris posts about 3 to 5 times a week, every weekday. Also, get the merch, FreshandFit Podcast Store, for all the shirts and hoodies that Fresh never wears on air. Check us out over there at FreshandFitPodcastStore.com. I just updated it, add some new. I took out the Simps to Pimps. I got some complaints from some guys saying, hey, man, when I wear the shirt and it has Simps to Pimps in the back, I get in trouble. So I made new shirts for 2022 that no longer have the Simps to Pimp in the back. Also, guys, we have another YouTube channel. It's called FreshandFit Clips. You don't have time to watch the full pod. Go ahead, check us out on FreshandFit Clips so you can watch me lose my hair in slow time versus, in fast time versus me losing it in slow time during the long streams when I debate these girls. And then also, Fresh, you got a vlog channel you want to talk about?
So, guys, for behind the scenes, the vlog channel, check it out. We just had a yacht party on Saturday. It was dope. We're posting that today as well. So thank you guys for watching that channel. And 100K on the way. Let's go.
Bam, bam. And then, Chris, what about you?
Guys, follow my Twitch, Aaron Poxon. Let's get it, Merch Gang. We out here. And follow my YouTube, Aaron's ACP Clips. At YouTube. Let's get it.
That boy just woke up.
Yeah, my man.
Yeah, man.
Dead.
Bro.
Damn.
Bro, Mara's like, yo, come on. I'm like, all right, I got you, bet.
Yeah, man. So without further ado, George, welcome to the show, man. We're excited to have you.
The legend himself.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. And we met you through Rolo. Shout out to Rolo Tomas. He's also in Florida.
Yeah, we met at the event that you had.
Yeah, Rebel Capital's live.
Yes, and that was an awesome event. Rolo was there, Robert Kiyosaki, a lot of other people. McElroy was there as well.
Yeah, Kenny McElroy was there. Just a lot of people in the macroeconomics world, the investment, finance, real estate, crypto, gold, all that. Freedom, liberty.
And it's funny because I asked George just in the elevator, I was like, bro, why do you do what you do? Because you don't need the money.
Yeah.
And he told me, I was like, wow, it makes sense. So
yeah, I just love talking about it. I mean, what was interesting is I retired in 2012 and I had enough money kind of saved up that if I got a 5 or 6% return, I wouldn't have to go back to work. So just being an entrepreneur my whole life, I mean, you guys know how it goes. You don't want to delegate that to a financial planner. You want to take control over your own financial destiny.
Absolutely.
So I went out there and started to study, okay, how does this investing thing work? How does economics work? And I was actually in Singapore at the time at the Marina Bay Sands. It was about 10 minutes before a dinner date. And I was on YouTube, in fact, and I stumbled across a series from Milton Friedman called Free to Choose. So Milton Friedman was a very influential economist in the pretty much through his whole life, but he won the Nobel Prize in 1976. And this Free to Choose series completely blew my mind. And that took me down the rabbit hole, and I started studying other great investors like Stan Druckenmiller and Warren Buffett and Jim Rogers. And that kind of led me to a conclusion that the way I want to invest is just to buy things when they're cheap and sell them when they're expensive.
Bam.
And that sounds
that's really what
like,
investing really is anyway, in general, right?
Yeah.
It's really what it is in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, I don't want to get too far off on a tangent, but what most people do is they try to guess the price direction. So, what is the price of real estate going to do right now? Well, I don't know. I don't care because I can never pick a top and I can never pick a bottom. The only thing I can do is tell you, is real estate expensive now or is it cheap now? If it's expensive, I want to sell it. If it's cheap, I want to buy it.
Bam.
And you just look back throughout history. You look at the inflation-adjusted prices, and it's very easy to do. It's just it takes patience,
Yeah.
and sometimes that's probably the thing that's most difficult. But I learned that quickly, so that's why I got into real estate investing in 2012.
Mm.
And another lesson there is usually, in fact, every single time I've made the most money with my investments, it's when people tell me I'm crazy for doing it.
Mm.
That's
So-
kind of the litmus test, and especially with Colombian real estate. You know, when I started investing there in 2015, everybody told me I was absolutely out of my mind. What? You're investing in real estate in Colombia?
Yeah,
And
well,
Pablo Escobar, and you're going to get kidnapped and all these things, you know. And of course, I just made a killing down there. But they did the same thing when I was investing in real estate in the U.S. in 2012. You know, because you guys are very young, but I'm sure you probably remember that prices peaked out in 2006,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and they went down every single year to 2012.
Yep.
So people have recency bias, right? So if prices have gone down the last 5 years, people just assume that prices are going to continue to go down
Mhm.
for the next 5 years. Just like if prices go up for 5 years, they think prices are going up for the next 500 years.
Yep.
And that's usually not what happens. So that was another example. But then, like I said, I started investing in 2012 here in the US. Then I kind of took that skill set that I learned to Colombia because the returns were a lot better. And to make a long story short, I'd gotten into macros. I was obsessed with it. I mean, this is what I was doing 8 hours a day, just listening to podcasts and listening to audio books
On macros.
on macroeconomics and investing.
Can you tell the
Yeah.
people, can you define macroeconomics for the people just so they kind of understand?
It's really tough. It's not the textbook definition. It's just trying to figure out how the global economy works and then what that means for probabilities of certain asset classes.
Bam.
And I mean, that's kind of a broad definition, but also too, what most economists get wrong, whether they're from the Keynesian school of economics or the Austrian school, is they don't understand money and they don't understand how dollars are created. So that would actually be a good thing to talk about here.
Yeah,
in a
we're
moment,
definitely
is
going to
how
talk
our
about that as well.
Yeah, because your audience really needs to understand that. And pretty much no one does, because if they can understand that, then they can make much better financial decisions for the future, regardless of whether they're interested in real estate, cryptocurrency, gold, stocks, bonds, it does, or even foreign investing.
And guys, we're going to talk about all these things for today's show. I'm really excited, so don't worry. Go ahead,
Guys,
Sam.
take notes because in here's pretty bright, like your future. If you listen to this advice today, so there you go.
So, what, Chris? So can you give us a little bit of background? Obviously, you're fairly risk tolerant. You know, you're striking and making things happen. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Portland, Oregon,
Okay.
and I almost flunked out of high school. And I mean,
Wait, how?
Oh, I was terrible in school. Terrible. I was always debate with the teachers. I'd always get in trouble. I'd always get in arguments with them.
Oh,
I think my
you was one of
senior
them.
year, I remember it well. I needed to pass. I was in 4 classes that I needed to be in 4 classes for athletics, right? And but I only needed 2 classes to graduate. So I got 2 D's and 2 F's. I remember my GPA, my final semester in high school was like a 0.5.
Wow, my mom would have beat my ass.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I always hated school. And I've never taken an econ class. I've never taken a finance class. I've never taken a business class.
Wow.
And I was a self-made millionaire by 34.
Nice.
And I retired at the age of 38.
Jeez.
So my point there for your audience is if I can do it, anybody can do it, really. And it's not just making money with as an entrepreneur, but it's also investing and making money that way as well.
So
Never think that you listen to the people talk on CNBC, and sometimes they use kind of an industry language. So you think, oh, I could never do that. I could never be at that high of a level. Don't kid yourself. Most of your audience right now listening has a higher intelligence than most of the talking heads on CNBC.
Wow.
So where'd you go to school? Did you have a bachelor's degree in?
Yeah, I went to Grand Canyon University. So, and same thing there. I got horrible grades, barely got through. I actually went there on a scholarship, and that was the only way I could get into college.
Yeah.
because my grades were absolutely terrible. An athletic scholarship.
Gotcha.
And
Play back because you're really tall. You're like taller than me. Like what? You 6'5"?
6'4".
Okay, yeah. So I'm 6'3". I'm like, oh damn, this guy's tall, man.
Yeah, he's pretty tall, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I actually went there on a golf scholarship. believe it or
Okay. What?
Yeah.
Division 1?
Though we played in a lot of D1 tournaments.
Okay.
But the school's not D1.
D2?
I don't even know what division we were.
I didn't even know golf was in NCAA. So wow.
Yeah, Yeah,
Well, see,
that was
NCAA. NCAA. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, guys. That was mid '90s. So
God damn, bro.
You're taking me way back. You're taking me way back.
So what got you after school into like, I guess, investing and learning about how to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Like, how'd you get there? Like, did you start a business right there and then after school, or did you like go into corporate America and say fuck this, or how?
No. So what I was doing is when I got out of school, I'm like, okay, well, what the hell am I going to do now? And I remember a lot of my buddies would always borrow my shirts in college.
Mhm.
I was like, you got some cool shirts. So I'm like, well, all my buddies are borrowing my shirts. So maybe if I made my own shirts, I could sell them. This was probably, 1998, 99, something like that. So back then, like a website, like, wow, you got a website? So I'm like, maybe I'll build my own website and actually sell them online. I know it sounds hilarious today, but back then that was kind of a novel idea.
Yeah.
So building an app today.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I started designing my own t-shirts. And so I didn't have any money,
This is fresh out of college?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have
What'd you get your degree in?
In PR.
Okay.
But it was a BS. It was
Okay.
a blow-off
Of course,
major. Yeah.
But you went for free, so it don't matter.
Well, it was a partial scholarship.
Oh, partial? Okay.
Yeah, it was a 50% scholarship. But anyway, so I started designing these t-shirts, and then I built my own website, and then I needed a way to fund it because I didn't have any money at all. I mean, I was just totally broke.
Mhm.
And so I got a job working valet in Vegas, the graveyard shift. So what I'd do is I had 4 10s. So I'd work it from 10 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock in the morning. So a 10-hour shift, 4 days a week.
Damn.
So then it was at the Nugget. And so I'd take all my tip money and I'd invest that into my business. So I'd leave, the job. And also another cool thing is back then they let you eat for free, even if you were off shift, if you were on property. So I'd go in an hour early, eat. I'd eat on my break, and then I'd eat when I get off work. So I'd eat all 3 meals, and then I could take all that money that I was saving on food and invest it into the t-shirt.
Wow.
Hey.
Finesse.
And we talk about this
Life hack.
so much because me and Fresh also came from working. I was in law enforcement with the government,
Yeah.
and he was doing tech. So we were able to kind of take our money that we made from our jobs to invest it in the studio and buy equipment and everything. And at some point, we're able to finally okay, we're in a position now where we could walk away from our jobs. With me, I was a little bit more reluctant because I did enjoy my job, but they kind of forced my hand. And thank God I had saved that money just like you're talking about now. And I was like, you know what? It's going to be a little uncomfortable, but we'll be able to make it. And, thankfully, the risk paid off. But no,
Yeah.
I like that. So you basically, how long did you do that before you went out onto your own?
Well, I can't
Saving
remember.
that money
was so
up, man.
long ago, maybe 9 months, something like that.
Oh,
So I
okay.
wasn't saving
Yeah.
the money. I was actually taking the tip money and investing it
Reinvesting.
directly into the business
Yeah.
and trying to buy more shirts and go to more boutiques and sell more t-shirts and, do the photography for the website and even buying hang tags for the shirt. I remember that was an expense that, I was like, where the hell am I going to get the money for this? So it was quite an ordeal, but of course I lost a ton of money.
Yeah.
I didn't make any money, but it really teaches you a lot
Experience.
of lessons. Yeah, that's right. That I was able to learn and apply to businesses that actually were successful later on in the future.
But having that mindset to take that money and put it into your business rather than put it into shopping or going partying is very important.
No,
Because
that was the whole reason I got the job. So
Mm.
it started with the business.
Mhm.
And then I thought to myself, how can I fund this business? Because I need to work during the day.
Mhm.
So that's why I tried to get a job as a valet because I knew I could work the graveyard shift.
Mm.
So it started with saying, okay, here's my business. How can I fund it? And then going from there.
Wow.
So I'll hit some of these super chats real quick, guys. Chris, we got one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, guys. So like the video first and foremost,
We got a
because
couple.
we got some great stuff that we're gonna be talking about today, guys. $2 from Tutoro. Any episodes or advice about trucking? Gracias. Maybe we'll hit that at the end, guys. And we will do a Q&A at the end.
Yeah.
So don't worry. Get your questions in now. Chris is gonna make a note of them. Drew, shout out to FNF. No, shout out to Drew for $20. Shout out to FNF for bringing us this knowledge. Hit that like button. Absolutely. Aceto Rusco goes, fellow rebel capitalist. Thanks for getting the main man GG on. Hope to see y'all in Miami for RCL3.
There you
$5.
go.
The Rebel Capitalist Live. All right.
Ariel Ye. Okay, I'm gonna butcher. I'm just gonna say Ariel. $10. Thank you so much. Mr. K, been following George since 2020. So much valuable content. Happy he's on hashtag Rebel Capitalist. $5 for Venom. It's so bright in that room, fresh looking like a silhouette. And then Baki Onigira, Team Gold Bullion and Team Crypto, which is actually, you know what? So that's actually a perfect segue into the next topic. So I know you talk about the market is always changing and it's volatile right now, etc. And I know there's different types of asset classes, right, that we can get into to help us hedge against. Well, I guess what we could talk about. Let's talk about the market in general. What's going on, inflation, and then I guess we can go into the different asset classes people can get into to protect themselves. That'd be okay.
So, when we first got into, you guys call it the beer bug. When I first was dealing with it, I was calling it the cerveza sickness. Because you guys know what YouTube would do back in 2020.
Yeah.
But when we were going into the cerveza sickness, I started talking about this in January 2020. And that, hey, this is something we really need to pay attention to. And
so you predicted it back then?
Oh, yeah.
Before, because here we closed everything down around early March.
No, I was talking about lockdowns. I was talking about the global police state. I was talking about them shutting down the Olympics. I was talking to friends of mine, such as Chris Martinson. So I got to give him all the credit.
Okay.
Eric Townsend, who runs a podcast called Macro Voices, and another good buddy of mine, Chris Irons, who runs the QTR podcast, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with. So these guys were all talking about it. I was listening to them and thinking through it myself, going over the actual real science and saying, okay, this is something that we should be paying attention to. And, ironically enough, everyone is calling me a tinfoil hatter. The same people now that call me a tinfoil hatter for being against mandates and whatnot. We'll just kind of leave it at that to keep it YouTube friendly. But back then I was saying that, from a standpoint of society, I was using that quote from Lenin, where he said there's decades that go by that nothing happens, and there's weeks that go by where decades happen.
I like that.
And I think that during 2020 and 2021, we've lived through that from a standpoint of society. But in 2022, we're going to live through that from an economic standpoint. Because we have had a lowering of interest rates, an interest rate environment where interest rates are progressively lower since 1981. We've gone from about 18% interest rates, and that's the Fed funds overnight rate, down to 0%. And now the Federal Reserve, as most of your listeners know just by watching the news, they're talking about increasing interest rates 2, 3, maybe 4 times this year. But it's not just about increasing interest rates, because what they've also been doing is something called quantitative easing. So what this is they're just creating bank reserves, which are the Fed's form of dollars, and they're buying treasuries and mortgage-backed securities from the banking system. And so this is increasing the size of their balance sheet. It does a few different things. It increases the balance sheet capacity, or the ability for banks to lend more. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
But what it's also done is it's created the stock market to go up and up and up, and this environment, really, from a psychological standpoint, where the stock market continues to go up.
Is that why we had some of the highs during the pandemic with the stock market?
Oh, yeah, because
of this quantitative easing?
Yeah, well, what happened when the market was really going down, if you guys remember that, in March of 2020?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah, the Fed had a meeting scheduled for a Wednesday. I can't remember the exact date, but they had an emergency meeting the Sunday prior because the market was just absolutely falling out of bed. So during that Sunday in the emergency meeting, they dropped rates all the way down to 0 again. And they said, okay, we're going to do $120 billion of quantitative easing every single month. So this is the Fed intervening in the marketplace to the tune of $120 billion a month. So that's a big deal, right? And so then what they said is we're also going to guarantee $1 trillion a day, $1 trillion a day in something called the repo market. So we don't need to go into that, but the repo market is like the plumbing of the financial system.
Okay.
So they're backstopping the entire system, the entire global economy, basically.
Wow.
So now what they're talking about doing is something called tapering. So you guys might have heard that, where the Fed came out November 3rd of 2021, and they announced that they would start tapering. So what that means is they've been doing $120 billion worth of quantitative easing every single month. They're going to start ratcheting that down. So they go from 120 down to 105, down to 85, down. I'm not sure where they are now, maybe 50 or 60, something like that.
So I just got into the stock market myself. Obviously nowhere near that level. So just so I can understand, and for the people out there too, guys, get your notebooks out, because I'm learning myself and I'm taking notes. So you guys should as well. So is quantitative easing from, I guess, in relation to the stock market and what happened before? Is it them essentially putting money into the market to just help it continue to grow?
Not really. It's more of a
Keep it
psychological. Yeah. So to make it easy, I think let's imagine that you're a bank like JP Morgan, and let's just say I'm the Federal Reserve. So we both have a balance sheet. We've got assets and liabilities on our balance sheet. You've got assets and liabilities on your balance sheet. So you have a checking account with me, JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or Wells Fargo or whomever you bank with,
Mhm.
most likely.
Chase. Well,
Chase. They're going to have a bank
Trash.
account, like a checking account with the Fed.
Yeah.
So those dollars are actually a liability of the Federal Reserve, just like your dollars that you have in your account are a liability of your bank.
Okay.
It's just a record of how many dollars they owe you. There's not green pieces of paper sitting in your account with Chase Bank.
Exactly.
It's just them saying, Myron, we owe you $1 million, because you have $1 million in your checking account, let's say. So that's an asset on your balance sheet. That's a liability on the bank's balance sheet. Well,
because they're responsible for holding it.
Well, they're not even holding it. I mean,
That's true. They're lending it out all over the place, but
So
they're not
that's
even
why
doing that.
it's
They're not
hard to
even
take
doing
out $1 million out of the bank because they don't have it there. It's kind of like you have to request it for them to get the money to you. Like if you want to pull out $1 million, like Grant Cardone, for example.
That's correct. So we'll go over that in a moment. Just write down, we don't have to talk about how money is created, because it's very important.
How money is what?
Created.
Okay, yeah. I have it written down
Or
here.
destroyed, because it's very few people understand that. If your audience can just learn that one thing today, they're going to be ahead of 99.9%.
If it ties into this, feel free to elaborate.
Guys, you hear that? Listen up well.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it ties in, feel free to elaborate.
Well, let's go over. Let's stick with quantitative easing.
Okay.
So, what the Federal Reserve will do, because your checking account is JP Morgan, is at the Federal Reserve. So now let's say that you, on your balance sheet, you own $1 billion of treasuries.
Okay.
Okay. So I say, okay, JP Morgan, I want to buy those treasuries from you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deposit $1 billion into your checking account that you have with me at the Federal Reserve. And then you're going to go ahead and sell me those treasuries. So the only thing that really happens is you just trade your treasuries for dollars. That's all you're doing.
Mhm.
So effectively what that does for the banks is it allows them to lend or create more loans in the real economy. But if the banks don't create more loans in the real economy, then it doesn't do anything.
Mm,
The banks still have to decide to do something. The Fed could do $1 trillion a day in quantitative easing, and it really wouldn't make any difference if the banks said, yeah, we're just going to lend the same amount. We're just not going to make a difference. Now, from a psychological standpoint, it makes a huge difference, because the marketplace sees this and they see that as being bullish. Oh, the Fed is printing money, or the Fed, you hear that all the time, or the Fed is creating liquidity. The Fed is backstopping the banks. The Fed is doing this. There's a Fed put, they say,
Mhm.
but it basically means the Fed's going to come in. They're not going to let the stock market crash.
yeah.
So therefore, you're going to go buy stocks. You're going to buy the riskiest stocks. You're going to go, what they say, you go out the risk curve, which just means you take more and more and more risk. Why not take more risk to get a higher return if you think the Fed's got your back and the Fed's going to backstop it? And they're only going to let the market go down by 10 or 15%. And then they're going to come in and they're going to keep doing whatever they need to do to prop it up. That's the idea, right? So technically, it doesn't do anything, but psychologically, it really does. Right.
Mm.
So then now we can get into how
Keeps
money.
people from being scared to spend money, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, another good example is some of your viewers might know this, going back to March of 2020, the Fed came in and they backstopped the corporate debt market. So what they did is they said, and they're not supposed to do that. That's totally illegal. But that's a whole separate topic. So they said, we're going to come in and backstop what they call junk debt or high yield debt, corporate bond market. And what happened is, as soon as they made that announcement, they didn't even have to do anything. And the prices of the bonds went way up, and the yields, the interest rates went way down, right? Because there's an inverse relationship between the two. And the Fed ended up only buying about $1 billion worth of corporate debt, which sounds like a lot to us, but for how much corporate debt is actually out there, that's just
Did they buy it
drop in the bucket.
from corporations that were too big to fail, essentially?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
it's all a buddy system.
Of course.
You're talking about the Cantillon effect. So the Fed is going to bail out the people who they like the best, or whoever Jerome Powell had dinner with, last week, or what. That's how the whole system works. They did that through a big company, I believe it was with BlackRock. The Fed didn't do it directly. They set up what they call a special purpose vehicle. But my point there is, it was just all psychological.
Yep.
Right. So now what's happening is they're doing that tapering. So that's psychologically, the market's like, oh, we don't like that, because now the Fed's saying that they don't have our back. So if you notice back to November 3rd, where the Fed announced tapering, they're still doing QE, they're just less and less and less.
Mhm.
What's the market done? It's become very volatile. And you'll notice that the NASDAQ has really gone down.
Yes.
Maybe disproportionately.
That's the reason
Yeah.
why I got into the stock market in the first place, was because it was crashing. And this
Yeah.
is I guess, one of the worst ones since the pandemic, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So, and then Kathy Wood's fund has really gone down. That's kind of a proxy on tech stocks. And then Bitcoin also
Yeah.
has really gone down. I'm not sure what percentage, but it got down almost under 30,000
Yes.
maybe a few weeks
It's
ago.
at back up now, but yeah, it definitely did like go down
Yeah,
significantly.
but what you'll notice is it's back up, but so is the NASDAQ. So Bitcoin is kind of, as of right now, kind of tied to the hip. Ideally, Bitcoin would be a non-correlated asset.
Yeah.
Right. But what we've seen is it's actually behaving as a correlated asset to risk assets, mainly the NASDAQ. So, I'm very bullish Bitcoin as an example long term, but I wouldn't add to my position until I see that decoupling with the price of Bitcoin compared to the NASDAQ.
Wow.
Because that's when it's a better time to buy, because that means all the people that don't understand Bitcoin or have just bought it to get rich, they've already sold. And the people who really understand Bitcoin, they're the only buyers left. And for me, that's when I want to add to my position, But before I get too sidetracked, let's go back to money creation, because that's very important. So when we were talking about quantitative easing, we were talking about me being the Federal Reserve with my balance sheet and you being JP Morgan, or let's just say that you represent the commercial banking system in aggregate total.
Okay.
Right. So all banks.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your balance sheet.
Okay.
So what you do is you go to a customer and they come and say, hey, I've got this incredible, our good buddy Kenny McElroy. We're talking about him, or Kiyosaki. Same thing.
Shout out to Kiyosaki.
That's right.
Robert.
And Kenny McElroy.
Yep.
So they say, we got this incredible deal. We're going to build this apartment complex in Austin, Texas, and bank, we need $100 million. So the bank says, Kenny, we've done business with you before. We know you're good for it. Let's do it. So that $100 million that they gave Kenny, that's new money. That didn't exist before. People think that's existing money, like other people's money that they just give to Ken. That's not how it works. That's money that did not exist before. So the total money stock, or the amount of dollars, let's say, that are circulating in the real economy just went up by $100 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if Kenny, just say the very next day, he's, oh, that deal went through, we don't need the $100 million. I'm just going to pay you right back. Now the total money supply has gone down by $100 million. So what I'm trying to get at here, and what people need to realize, the commercial banks are in charge of how many dollars are circulating in the real economy. People like to think that the central banks are central, but they're not. Jerome Powell does not control the dollar. Jamie Dimon controls the dollar, meaning the banksters control the amount of dollars. The central bankers do not.
Okay.
At the end of the day.
These guys are, I'm assuming, prominent bankers. These guys.
Jamie Dimon.
Okay.
Yeah. He's the CEO of JP Morgan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is the biggest bank in the United States, if I'm not mistaken.
One of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can just say the banksters. The guys that are in charge of the banks, they're the ones that really control the dollar. It's not Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve.
So let me get this straight, just so I can kind of understand it. So there's money. When the money gets printed, it goes to the bank, and the bank loans that money out.
Well, the money's lent into right. So what happens first and foremost is they've got bank reserves at the Fed. Okay. So then what they'll do, but they, in all honesty, they really don't even need the bank reserves.
Okay.
I don't want to get too technical, but it's just really on the balance sheet of the commercial banks. If they see someone who they think is a good, is credit worthy, and they can make money on the loan, they're going to give them the money.
Mm-hmm.
And they're creating that money out of thin air. That money did
Yeah.
not exist. So the banks literally print money. They're the ones that create the money. It's not the central bank.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
commercial banks.
So it's not okay. So because we're over here thinking they're over at the U.S. Mint just printing a lot of money, blah blah blah. So it's really the banks
That's
that are
right.
the ones that are responsible for 40% of the currency in circulation right now.
That's right. So I know the other day, I think I heard you
That's a
say
bomb drop, dude.
on one of your podcasts or something like that the amount of M2 money supply has increased by 25% in 2020 alone.
Yes.
And that's correct. That's
Yeah.
a correct statement. But that's not a result of the Fed, doing quantitative easing. That's a result of one of two things: either the banks creating all those additional dollars, that could be one way,
Mhm.
or now we're kind of in this weird type of hybrid system, right?
Mhm.
So the way that works is if the government comes in and says, okay, we want to deficit spend. So remember back in 2020 when they did the CARES Act?
Yes.
You guys remember that? Yeah, and our deficit was about $5 trillion. So the U.S.
And the CARES Act is when they were given the stimulus checks.
stimmies and PPP,
That's the stimulus checks,
yeah.
guys. Is what he
Stimmy
means.
pack.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
stimmy packs. Because I
so-
remember they sent one out, I think, for like $1,600 or $1,800, and they sent another one out for like $1,200
Oh,
or
there's a
something like
lot.
that.
And they did a child tax credit. They did,
600.
they did another thing where, you know, they wouldn't let landlords evict their tenants.
Yes.
So the
Yeah.
tenants,
Moratorium.
yeah, and then they had a mortgage payment forbearance program and whatnot. There was a lot of programs that they had, but it was just basically what's called stimmies, you know. And it wasn't all $5 trillion, but they had $5 trillion in deficit spend. So what that means is the government is spending $5 trillion more than they're taking in tax receipts.
Okay.
So to make that very easy for your audience, let's say that you guys, someone in your audience on the live stream right now makes $100,000 a year.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, if they spend $200,000 in a year, they have to borrow $100,000 because they spent $100,000 above and beyond what they made. That's deficit spending,
Gotcha.
right?
Borrowing more money when you already owe money.
Well, it's spending more money than you earn, and therefore you've got to borrow a
Okay.
difference to spend.
Okay.
Right. So you're only making $100,000 a year, but you spend
200
a year.
Okay.
So where are you going to get that extra 100? You got to borrow it.
Exactly.
Put it on a credit card as an
Yeah.
example. That's a good way to look at it.
Okay.
So what the government does say, okay, we got to do this CARES Act. So we're going to spend an extra $5 trillion. Right. So where are we going to get that? Well, you know, the Fed comes in and says, well, you know, we'll go ahead and buy those bonds. That's the quantitative easing that I was talking about. So what's interesting about that is when the Fed is buying the treasuries from the treasury itself, and it's kind of, they don't buy them directly. It's kind of a shell game, but we'll just assume that they're buying them directly from the treasury. So that's Janet Yellen. You know, she's issuing the debt. She's issuing the treasuries because she needs the money to spend the stimmies.
Okay. And is she
Okay.
the
Treasury Secretary.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, she's in charge of the treasury for the federal government.
Yep.
So she's like, well, I need $5 trillion. So I've got to issue $5 trillion worth of treasuries, worth of bonds, worth of debt, right? So usually the market would buy those bonds. So let's just say that the three of us represent the market.
Mhm.
So you represent corporations.
Mhm.
I represent the average Joe and Jane, and maybe you represent the banks
Mhm.
or pension funds, something like that. So what happens is if Janet Yellen says, hey, here's $5 trillion worth of debt, guys, or IOUs, treasuries, and the three of us buy all $5 trillion. Okay. What's happening is those dollars are coming out of the system
Mhm.
because we're paying her our existing dollars. And then Janet Yellen is taking those dollars and then she's spending them back into the economy through, let's just say PPP or stimmies. Let's just say all $5 trillion were stimmies. So we send her $5 trillion. She gives us the treasuries, right? Just basically say the treasuries that we have that say the government owes us this amount plus principal. We're basically lending our money to the treasury or to the federal government. Then she takes the $5 trillion and she writes 5 trillion stimmy checks. Those stimmy checks go out. The people that receive the stimmy checks deposit those checks into their bank. And now all of a sudden, those $5 trillion are back in the economy. Right? So you take the dollars out of the economy because it goes to the treasury. Then the treasury spends the money back into the economy. So on net balance, there's still the same amount of dollars, right? Here's the difference with the Fed. When the Fed buys it, what do they use to buy those from Janet Yellen? Because they use bank reserves that they create out of thin air. Nowhere. These dollars don't exist. So the Fed just says, okay, now we're going to print up $5 trillion. And Janet Yellen, we're going to just deposit them into your account. So now you've got the $5 trillion. And Janet Yellen says, thank you very much, Jerome Powell. Now I'm going to take the 5 trillion stimmy checks and I'm going to send them out. Same thing, right? And then those people get the $5 trillion of stimmy checks. They deposit it into their bank accounts. But see, now what's happened is Janet Yellen didn't take the dollars out of the economy to begin with. You see, because
she took them from the market.
Yeah.
No, the Fed bought them.
Okay.
So when the Fed buys the treasuries, they create new, basically dollars that didn't
Out of
exist
thin air.
before. Out of thin air, you got it.
Digits.
That's
Okay.
right. So when she's buying them from us, she's taking existing dollars.
Yep.
When she buys them, when she sells them to the Fed, they're creating new dollars.
Okay.
right? Because the Fed doesn't have any dollars. All they do is just go to literally they go to a computer, and because Janet Yellen, just like JP Morgan, the Treasury has an account with the Fed. That's where their checking account is. It's called the Treasury General Account. Okay. So if the Treasury, or excuse me, if the Fed buys $5 trillion worth of treasuries from Janet Yellen, all they do literally is go to their computer and just go to their account and type in $5,000,000,000 trillion. They just add $5 trillion to their account balance.
George, what's the long-term goal you think for the Fed?
Well, now I think it's to prop up asset prices, because see what's happened, unfortunately, is the U.S. economy has been really built and is dependent upon asset bubbles. So, before we were recording, or maybe that was right at the beginning, you guys were asking me kind of what my strategy is for investing.
Yeah.
I said, really, I just like to buy things when they're cheap and sell them when they're expensive. But I don't think there's anyone on the live stream right now that would argue and say that that share prices are cheap or real estate is cheap. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's wildly expensive.
Especially now.
Yeah. So I mean, the prices right now for homes, as an example, are higher than they were in 2006.
Yeah.
So if we're in a bubble then, how could we not be in a bubble now? And that's even when you adjust for inflation. So what's happened, unfortunately, is our entire economy has been built around asset bubbles. And the Fed knows this. So they have to keep those asset bubbles inflated. They have to keep blowing air into those bubbles because they know that if they let those bubbles burst, then the entire economy will come down with it, right? I mean, let's just do a quick thought experiment here, right?
Okay.
So I always use the example of like a school teacher in California. Let's say this school teacher is making like 50 or 60 grand a year back in like 2012. And she or he goes out and they buy a house for 250 grand. And so this is at the bottom of the market. You guys know how depressed it was. So they buy this house for 250 grand. Well, now let's say it's 2022, and that house is now worth, let's say, 2.25 million. Right. Well, did that school teacher produce any more goods and services? Was she any more productive? Did she even work an extra hour? No. But all of a sudden, she's got $2 million in additional purchasing power, right? Well, she's going to cash out of that house. She's going to go over, and with 400,000, maybe she's going to buy a house in Phoenix. So that employs the general contractor over there. That employs the bankers. That employs the real estate agent. Then she's going to take the other, let's say she's got 1.5 million that's left over. Then she's going to go ahead and spend that money over here and spend that money over here. And in an economy that's 70% consumer spending,
Yes.
you see how that trickles down to the entire economy and supports it, right?
Yeah.
Now let's just assume for a moment that instead of the house going from 250,000 up to 2.25 million, let's say that it went down in price by 200,000. Well, where would all that additional spending go? It's gone. It's gone. So then what would all happen to the jobs? What would happen to the real estate agents? What would happen to the contractors? What would happen to the restaurants where she would have spent money? What would happen to the daycare where she would have spent money? What would happen to the real estate market in Phoenix? You see all these what we call knock-on effects, right? So you can imagine what would happen in aggregate total right now if the stock market went down by 50% and the housing market went down by 50%. What do you think the economy would do? What do you think the unemployment rate would do? I mean, let's just go back to 2020, right in March. The unemployment rate went up almost to 20%. 20%.
That's insane.
You were talking to me about this place that you guys lease and how easy it was and how cheap it was.
Yes.
Back in 2020.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what do you think would have happened if the Fed would not have stepped in, if the government would have stepped in with the CARES Act, and the stock market would have gone down by 50% and would have stayed there, would not have recovered? You could have just renegotiated this lease at probably half the price that you paid in 2020.
Yeah.
You go to, I'm sure now it's very difficult to get a table at a restaurant, or when you guys go to one of your nightclubs, I'm sure bottle service is twice as expensive as it was in 2020. I can promise
Miami's been exploding.
They're flourishing.
Yeah.
bottle service would be like $100 right now.
Yo, I'm seeing
if
people pop bottles
unemployment-
like every almost second, bro. It's like crazy.
And that's because,
money.
and that's why, because it's all crypto.
Yeah.
It's because they've made a ton in crypto, they made a ton in real estate, or they've made a ton in stocks.
Yeah.
Right. Have they produced any more? Have they produced any more goods and services? And the reason I harp on that so much, and this is another idea that I think would be valuable for your audience to understand, is wealth has nothing to do with money. Nothing. Absolutely zero. Wealth is goods and services. It's a society's ability to produce goods and services efficiently. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're stranded on a deserted island and you've got a chest full of $1 billion or a $1 billion worth of gold, anything. You name the asset, right? But all you have are a couple coconuts, some sand, and some salt water, right? Are you rich or are you poor?
In that context, poor.
You're poor.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's no goods and services. Money is nothing. It doesn't mean anything.
Energy.
What's really valuable are the production of goods and services. That's why I always go back to that. And so when you think about the standard of living for a society, you can't think of it in terms of dollars. You've got to think of it in terms of productivity, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right?
So it's not that the first world countries have more money necessarily. It's that they have the strongest ability to create goods and services.
That's right.
That's what dictates GDP, not necessarily
Well,
the money.
I wouldn't say GDP. I'd say standard of living.
Standard of living.
Yeah,
Okay.
because GDP can go like Venezuela probably has the highest growing GDP of all time, but it's
Good example.
hyperinflation, right?
Yeah.
So
Good.
it's about real GDP, which just means GDP adjusted for the rate of inflation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what makes China so goddamn powerful.
Yeah, you know,
because they're offering all kinds of services and products.
And infrastructure as well. Yeah, they
Yes.
produce a lot of stuff, so they would be rich. You know, they would be a creditor nation. Japan as well as a creditor nation, although their government debt is huge. But you know, another great example would be going back to communist Russia in like the 1950s. You guys probably don't. You know, I wasn't even alive then, but I'm sure maybe in some of your history classes you saw those old black and white pictures of like Soviet Russia, where there's like standing in line for 4 hours to get a loaf of bread. And they all kind of look destitute and poor. You know, they're all wearing the same shoes and stuff like that. And they could barely turn on the heat in their house and whatnot. And as Americans, we think that's because they didn't have any money. That's not the case. They all had money. They all had a lot of money. And the unemployment rate was incredibly low. It was like maybe 1% in communist Russia. The problem was there was no stuff. There was no stuff, right? So then we look at the Great Depression here in the United States, right? Well, why was the Great Depression bad? It's because people didn't have money, but the net result was still the same, that we had the stuff, but they didn't have access to stuff. See, that's really key. And in Venezuela right now, you know, we were talking about that hyperinflation. What's the problem there? What the real problem? The problem is they don't have access to stuff. So whether you don't have the dollars, whether you don't have the stuff, or whether you're like Venezuela and your economy is so destroyed that you can't produce stuff, the net result is all the same. And that means the standard of living is decreasing. But for your audience, you know, if they're looking at something that's going on in the economy or a policy from the administration, let's say mandates, and we won't say what mandates we're talking about to keep it YouTube friendly, but everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? When you say, okay, every business with over 100 employees needs to do X, Y, and Z. Now, when you're thinking about that strictly through terms of economics, you've got to ask yourself, are we going to produce more goods and services as a result of this or less? And if the answer is we're going to produce less, that means by definition, society in general is going to become poorer, and our standard of living in aggregate total is going to go down. And unfortunately, that disproportionately affects the poor and middle class the most.
So the feds are getting money out of thin air without any productivity being done and just giving it to us.
Well, the concept is right. Basically, what's happening is the Americans have lived beyond their means, so to speak, because of asset prices going up. And that goes back to one of the main reasons of the dollar being the world reserve currency. You know, we could talk about that as well and how that affects markets. But that's allowed people to consume more than they produce. And if you just take that to its logical conclusion, that doesn't end well.
Yes, because
right?
that means we're living on debt, and we owe a lot of money, And
asset
we're on borrowed
prices.
time right now. It seems
That's
like
right. So so you can just think of a very simple economy that I use in like my whiteboard videos.
Yeah.
And I just say, okay, there's a farmer that grows corn, another one that grows cattle or whatever, and another one that grows wheat. Right. What they have to do is they have to produce more than they consume. So if they produce more than they consume, that means that someone else in the economy doesn't have to produce wheat. They can just get it from the farmer.
Yeah.
So that means that they can just be a school teacher.
Bam.
They can be a doctor. They can be an engineer. They can do a podcast.
Yep.
You guys can do your podcast right here because you don't have to produce food,
Yes.
because the farmers are producing more food than they are consuming, right? But society has to do that at large. You can't have a society that's consuming more than they produce, right? Or else who the hell's producing it? You say, well, the Chinese. Well, that's great. Well, what happens if they don't? And then what are they doing with those dollars that we're sending them? They're buying our assets. So they're getting rich, we're getting poor, right? And that's so when you're thinking of it in those terms, you say, okay, well, if we've been consuming far more than we produce, and we could just go out to any nightclub, as you were saying earlier here in Miami, and see people that are consuming far more than they produce or have produced.
Crypto millionaires.
Yeah, exactly. Just because their assets have gone up, whatever asset class that is, right? At some point in time, that has to come to an equilibrium, which means that the amount of consumption doesn't have to go back down to the level of production. The level of production has to exceed
Bam.
the rate of consumption because we've been over consuming for so long. You see, so if you think that we've been over consuming, let's say since 1981, we have to underconsume and overproduce for the next 20 or 30 years to make up for that. And that's what the Fed and the government is trying to hold off right now. They're trying to make that go away. They're trying to kick that can down the road because that's an environment that makes the 1930s, the Great Depression, look like a picnic.
Wow. Holy shit.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
All right.
Right.
I'm reading these chats real quick and get right back into it, man. I hope you guys enjoyed that right there.
That was fire.
Because that was probably one of the most in-depth explanations on how the market works with money.
How money's created.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Where are we at, Chris?
1 second.
And guys, do me a quick favor while we pull this up. Like the video number one,
because
because nobody else has this kind of content. We teach you guys how to make money, teach you guys about finances in general, show you guys how to get girls, show you guys how to get in shape. Number one men's podcast for a reason. Shout out to George for giving all his value.
And follow George as well.
Yes.
On
All
his
his links are below, guys. I put his Twitter, his website, his YouTube, Instagram, everything is there. Check them out. So we got George Coquinos here. Thoughts on AMC and GME going forward? What up, Fresh and Fit? Blessed content. All right, we'll make a note of that. Kendall Short, lender. Even with rates climbing, we cannot keep up with demand for housing. New builds are too expensive, and the affordable homes are still in bidding wars. The RE market, real estate market, isn't crashing. Maybe a correction. Okay. And we're going to talk about real estate here in a second. I think that's going to be the next
I'm happy
topic.
to discuss that because I'm sure that's probably most important, or that's most applicable to most people.
For sure.
Real estate.
Cal L, awesome to see George Gammon on the number one podcast in the world. The whiteboard breakdown videos on your YouTube channel are excellent. Yeah, I was, dude, definitely. I was going to ask him, like, hey, did you want the whiteboard? I was like, hey, I have it pre-written. We don't have time for that, but maybe on the next one, guys. We got Johnny Sims. Thoughts on Divvy Homes rent-to-own program as a way to get into real estate? Okay, we're going to talk about real estate here in a second. Estacada Riches. Thoughts on Chinese debt, 100 trillion in real estate companies. Are you aware of Tether USDT being basically digital fiat money and thus overinflating the crypto markets? We'll talk about that.
Yep.
Kendall Short lender. George, we are definitely due for a correction or stabilization, but do you believe that will actually crash? RE has a history of always appreciating. True. Okay, Jose Perez. George, I just have one question. Is it safe?
No, stiff drink time.
Stiff drink time, yeah. Okay.
I always say that on my whiteboard videos.
And then Metab Malwa. Hey, George, give FNF the monopoly example that Preston Pish often gives. Love both of your content.
Yeah, Preston's great.
Then Justin Del Valle. Hey, George, quick question. Got 800K sitting in a low-cost total market index fund, Vanguard. And should I keep it all there or spread it elsewhere? I'm 27, by the way. Live in NY. Thanks. Okay, so make a note of those. So we'll get into real estate, guys. And some of these questions are probably going to get answered during the course of the show. But we will definitely make sure all you guys get your stuff. So I guess we could transition over now to
maybe we could talk about 2022 and how your audience could maybe make some good, I hate to use the word prediction, but how they could assess the probabilities better. I always say there are no certainties, there are only probabilities.
Yeah, and we can talk about, I guess, maybe each asset class and what probability is what. Okay, so
so what we could do is we could just go through kind of macro what may happen in 2022 and then ask ourselves how that would affect each major asset class.
Perfect. If you think that's better, let's do it, baby.
Yeah. So if we are to take the Fed at their word, they're saying they're going to raise interest rates, let's say 3 times. So, well, first and foremost, they're going to reduce quantitative easing. Remember the tapering we were talking about?
Yep.
They're going to reduce that down to 0. Okay. And then they're going to start raising interest rates. So let's just say they raised interest rates 3 times in 2021.
Which is what's
or
kind of happening
2022.
right now, right? If I'm not mistaken. Maybe
Well,
in
they're
the
just
early
talking
stages of
about it.
that. Yeah.
So if you want to know how dependent the market is on the psychology from the Fed, just look at what has happened to the market, especially risk asset, really risky, because NASDAQ, you figure, is maybe a little more risky than the S&P because of those high growth, tech stocks. Look at what's happened since the Fed's just announced tapering and interest rates. They haven't even raised interest rates yet. They just made the announcement.
Yeah.
And we see all this massive volatility back and forth. What happens when they actually follow through and increase interest rates? And then the next thing that they're planning on is 3 things: tapering, raising interest rates, and something called quantitative tightening. So we talked about quantitative easing, right? That's where the Fed is buying the treasuries and the mortgage-backed securities from JP Morgan.
Yep.
But when they do quantitative tightening, it's the opposite. Now they're selling, so they're reducing the cash that JP Morgan has at the Fed. And so they're swapping back. See, initially I gave you dollars, JP Morgan, and you gave me your treasuries. Now I'm giving you your treasuries back, and I'm reducing the amount of dollars that you have. Okay. So why this is a big deal is because if you look at the Fed, when they started quantitative easing, that was back in 2008, 2009. Okay. And so
right after the real estate crash.
The GFC.
Yeah.
The GFC, that's right.
Okay.
So the stock market
GFC is what great?
The global financial crisis.
Yeah, okay.
So what happens is the stock market has pretty much stayed in lockstep with the Fed's balance sheet. So as they're doing quantitative easing, the stock market's going up. Now, when they stopped doing quantitative easing back in 2017, 18, then you see the stock market kind of plateaus. Well, it's really followed the Fed's balance sheet. So if the Fed is reducing the size of their balance sheet, if they're doing quantitative tightening, that's going to put even more downward pressure on the stock market than just raising interest rates alone.
So it's a multi-pronged.
It's like a perfect
situation.
storm.
Okay.
It's like a perfect storm. You've got these asset prices or these stocks that are priced to perfection, right? The Facebooks of the world, these huge tech stocks that have very low earnings or profit relative to their share price, right? So they're priced for perfection, and they're priced for interest rates staying at 0%, the Fed funds rate, for indefinitely into the future. That's how they're priced. So when that interest rate changes, then the price of the stock has to change as well. All right.
Okay.
So if the Fed goes through with this, there's going to be tremendous downward pressure on the stock market. We know that.
So you think it's going to get worse with the stock market
if the Fed follows through?
Okay.
So then the question is, and what the rebuttal from most people on your chat will be, okay, George, I get it, but what's going to happen is if the Fed raises rates and they see the stock market crashing, they're just going to say, just like March of 2020. Oh, sorry.
Let's have that Sunday meeting again.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. They're going to say, oh, sorry, we were just joking.
We're going back to the quantitative easing thing.
You got it.
Yeah, okay.
You got it.
I'm learning here, guys. Okay,
right.
Pay attention, just like me.
That's right. But see, the difference now, though, as you guys know, is inflation is very high. So we've got something called the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. So that's, you guys have noticed, I'm sure, when you've gone to the grogrocery store over the last couple of years.
Food's up.
Way up.
Man, I'm buying blackberries. It's way more expensive now.
Yeah.
Actually, the can of soda at the sushi spot was like, what, $5 or $4?
Yeah.
For a can of soda.
Oh, everything. Used cars. Even, the McLaren. That McLaren that I bought when I was here last time.
Yeah.
Remember that? I went to take that into the dealership to sell it on consignment because I'm going to Colombia. So I'm having the dealer sell it.
Mm-hmm.
They're pricing it $40,000 higher than what I paid for it in, call it, April of 2021.
I believe it.
So that's an example of maybe not an example everyone can relate to, but that's an example of consumer prices going up, right? So the problem with that for the politicians is you got to look at that through the lens of like Joe Biden or any of the Democrats that are trying to be reelected this year during the midterm. Maybe Joe Biden's 2024, but whomever's trying to get reelected during 2022. Consumer price inflation is kryptonite. Meaning that if you've got high consumer prices in your area or nationwide, the probability of you getting reelected is almost zero. Almost zero.
So that's almost a critical factor in getting reelected for a second term.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you guys don't remember, but Jimmy Carter, it's one of the things that crushed him when he was running back in the 1970s is
Yeah.
that consumer price inflation was so high. And usually what happens is the prices go up faster than the wages.
Okay.
So that,
And have we been on that trend for a significant amount of
yeah.
time, right?
oh yeah.
Yeah, because I remember they upped the minimum wage in New York. There's a lot of backlash on that, etc. And I guess keep up with the increased living costs. But we've pretty much been behind on this situation.
If you look at a chart of inflation and then wage, or all you have to do is just really look at a chart of real wages, which would be wages adjusted for inflation.
Mhm.
Since the 1970s, it's pretty much flat.
Yeah.
Pretty much flat. And then what happens in 2020, because inflation increases so rapidly, that sure, we have seen wages gone up, but they haven't gone up near as fast as your groceries have, or as your rent payments, or your car insurance, or your kids' college tuition, or your daycare. Those prices have gone up much faster. So what that means is the poor and middle class, once again, are getting squeezed.
Mhm.
And that's in a way that they can understand. You know,
Yeah.
they might not understand the quantitative easing and the, yada, yada repo market, but they understand when they're paying $10 a pound for beef instead of $5 a pound. And when they go into the voting booth, that's what they remember.
Mm.
You see, and they say, I don't care if I'm a Democrat, I don't care if I'm a Republican, I just want my prices to go down. And if this is the guy or girl that made the prices go up, I want them out. And the politicians know that.
So we have, like we said before, with the perfect storm. Essentially, what's happening with inflation, guys, and what inflation basically is, guys, is your money loses its buying power, right? So the buying power is going down while prices are simultaneously going up.
Yeah.
So not only is your money not able to buy as much as it did before, but now everything is increasing. So it's like you're burning the candle at two different ends.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically the concept. It's
Yeah.
just your purchasing prices are just going up.
So
They're
now-
up faster than your wages.
I have a theory that they can do it on purpose. You think for election times?
Well, so here's what I think is going to happen. You going back to March of 2020,
Mhm.
we were actually in an environment of disinflation. So that's not deflation where prices are going down, but that just means that prices are going up. Let's just say at a very slow pace.
Okay.
Okay.
At a
or-
more
Yeah.
manageable pace.
It's usually a slower pace of disinflation, but we'll just assume that the CPI was at 1.5%. So it's not a big deal to consumers. They're not seeing the price of their beef go from $5 a pound to $10 a pound. So they're not freaking out about it, So back in 2020, the Fed can come in there and say, oh yeah, we're doing more quantitative easing. We're doing more X, Y, and Z. And the politicians aren't going to care because they're not worried about inflation. Or the government can come in and say, hey, we're going to do $5 trillion worth of stimmy checks. And they're not worried about inflation because inflation is relatively low. But what happens when the stock market crashes, if real estate crashes, and we're in an environment with high inflation, the government can't come in and say, oh, we're going to spend $5 trillion of stimmy checks. Why? Because that makes inflation worse. And that means that the probability of them getting reelected is even lower. So you can imagine this phone call between the administration and Jerome Powell. If we have stocks crash, let's just say, going back to March of 2020, if this happens in 2022 as a result of them raising rates.
And Jerome Powell's the
Fed chair.
Okay.
He runs the Fed.
He runs the Fed. Okay.
So, you can hear the Biden, calling Jerome Powell and saying, hey, I heard that you're going to bring rates back down to zero and do more quantitative easing. And Jerome Powell says, yeah, well, I have to. I've got to save the stock market.
Yeah.
I've got to keep these asset bubbles blown or it's going to crush the whole economy.
They're essentially continuously putting a Band-Aid on a busted pipe to stop the bleeding for a period of time, but it can never last, and they got to keep switching out the Band-Aid. Would that be a fair analogy?
Yeah, but they have to do more and more. I think a better analogy would be a heroin addict. And
Okay.
but
I
what
like
we're
that.
talking
To get
about
that
is
same high, you need more and more.
that's right. We're talking about monetary heroin.
Wow.
The economy is the drug addict. The economy is the heroin addict. And the stock market is the heroin addict. So is the housing market. And it needs more and more and more and more of those dollars, that currency, the funny money, the fiat currency, the liquidity to go higher and higher and higher, just like that drug addict needs more and more of the drug to get the same effect.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
but the problem
Holy
with
crap.
that analogy is you guys know where that leads. Sooner or later, the heroin addict kills himself.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing with the economy. The monetary heroin will kill the economy, just like real heroin will kill an actual human being. See?
Wow.
So, as the average
Great
person,
explanation.
George,
Yeah.
in your humble opinion, what is the best method for someone to use this information to either better their family or themselves to kind of like avoid this breakdown?
Yeah, see, well, I think what they have to first do is go back to that conversation with Biden and Jerome Powell,
Mm.
right? Where Jerome Powell says, listen, if I don't do this, the whole economy is going to crash. And Biden says, listen, you did that in 2020. That's fine. Now you cannot do that. I cannot spend all this money. You can't, do something that increases asset prices because it's going to increase inflation, and then I'm not going to get reelected. You see, so it's a different conversation. Why I'm trying to finish that thought is so your viewers can assess the probability of Jerome Powell coming back in and propping up the markets in 2020 or in 2022 like he did in 2020. I'm not saying that he's not going to do it. I'm saying the probability is far, far, far lower today than it was in an environment where we didn't have high consumer price inflation.
Okay. Wow. Okay. A lot there, guys. Hope you guys are learning here. So Chris, we'll hit some of these chats real fast.
So who has the ultimate say, Jerome or the president? Who has the ultimate say? Like, let's say for example, oh well, sorry, Biden, I got to do it, or could it say Biden say, hey, you can't do it? Who has the ultimate say? You would think.
I think it's probably the administration because
as a
people
whole.
like to think the Fed is an independent entity, and supposedly they are, but I don't buy that. I
Okay.
think they're just kind of a branch of the government. And I think where
Frontman.
that goes,
Mhm.
if you kind of try to use some game theory there, like what would you do if you were Biden?
Yeah.
I think what happens is price controls. So they say, listen, we have to do more stimmy checks, as an example. We have to drop rates back down in order to prop up the market, or else the economy is going to tank, and then I'm not going to get reelected anyway, right?
What would you
So-
say? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So how can I prop up the economy while at the same time put a cap on inflation, consumer price inflation, price controls? So the government comes out and they say, listen, average Joe and Jane voter, the reason we've had such high prices since 2020 is because these capitalists, these greedy capitalists, have taken advantage of the cerveza sickness or the beer bug, right? They've taken advantage of the pandemic and they've tried to rob you blind by increasing prices for no reason other than just sheer greed. So what I'm going to do is Joe Biden or the administration is I'm going to stick up for the little guy. We're going to take bold, aggressive action, and we're going to come out with price controls. We're going to make it illegal for the grocery store to raise the cost of food. We're going to make it illegal for your landlord to raise the price of your rent. And it's not going to be like the 70s because everyone knows those price controls were bad. And all price controls are bad, just FYI. But what they're going to do, I think, is say, oh, it's going to be like the price controls we had in the 1940s. Those were good. We're going to do the good price controls. And therefore, it's the administration trying to kind of paint this facade to make themselves look good in order to just have some slim hope of getting reelected.
It sounds good. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll hit these chats real quick. And guys, do me a favor. Like the
Like the
video.
video, man.
Okay.
And by the way, that'll make things way worse. I just want to
Oh,
add that.
yeah, no, for sure. Mal L, how's Fresh Stutter Ninja that can't form coherent sentences on after-hour shows, but the moment George Gammon comes on the pod, he first looks like an economist.
Hey
I'm
man,
confused. That's
I'm
hilarious.
focused right now. And by the way, I'm gonna play dumb on camera, but my money, I'm pretty smart. So
There you go.
So Mac Joseph, I wonder if he can talk about the 2008 crisis, like what was on purpose and what wasn't, the bank going down. Cool. What's the ideal picks for Vanguard Roth account? And then and that's from Saint REI. And then we got Charles Gaidu. Essentially, big money, Fed, and government are all scheming to keep us from knowing we're poor. And then anything else, Chris?
No, we're good.
Okay. So I guess we could. So we got an overview, I guess, about where we are with inflation and everything. What would you say the inflation rate is now? Because normally it was 2%. Would you say we're significantly higher than that?
Well,
at this
that's what
point?
the government claims. I mean, it's a lot higher than that in reality.
Okay.
I
What
would
do you
say
think it's
probably,
closer?
probably 12, 15%.
Does that constitute as hyperinflation?
No.
Okay.
That would be 50% a month.
So okay, so hyperinflation is
A month.
50%.
Yeah, the technical definition
Okay.
would be 50% per month.
Oh shit. Okay.
That's bad.
But it's still, yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, that's really bad. But we're still not. I mean, with 14%, that's not good either. So, was
Yeah, I
it?
mean, we've been here before. I mean,
Okay,
in the
we have been here.
1970s, the CPI, and it was measured a little more honestly in the 1970s than it is today. I think it got up to maybe 13, 14%. But in the 1940s, inflation got up to almost 20%.
Okay.
Most people
Wow.
don't remember that. Yeah, they think the 1970s was the decade of inflation, but 1940s was just as bad.
So how is all this going to affect, I guess, so first we'll talk about the real estate market. How's it going to affect it? Do you think it's going to make it crash? What do you see?
Yeah, so we think about if the Fed raises rates, if the markets puts downward pressure on the markets, if they can't really do anything about it, then what happens to people's purchasing power when they go to buy a new home is it decreases because they'd have if they can afford, let's say, a $2,000 mortgage payment at a 1% interest rate. We'll just try to keep the math simple.
That'd be a dream.
That would let's say they could afford $2,000 a month. Let's say that's a $400,000 house at 1%, right?
Yep.
Well, if interest rates go to 10%, they cannot afford that $400,000 house because they can just afford the $2,000 a month payment. Now they can only afford, let's say, a $200,000 house. So that's a lot less buying power. So if you have that much that lowered buying power in aggregate total, that would put downward pressure on prices. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that prices go down. Another thing that's very important, another concept that would be very valuable for your listeners to really gain from this conversation is that there's always cross currents involved. Whenever you're trying to think of the price of real estate, for example, there's not just one thing that's going to make the real estate market go down. There's always pressures that are pushing prices down and other pressures that are pushing prices up. You've got to be cognizant of all the pressures and all the cross currents.
So many moving parts.
That's right. And try to determine which cross current is going to be the most powerful.
Bam.
For how long of a time, right? So that's one cross current that will put downward pressures or act as a headwind to prices. Now, that said, I think one of your viewers said earlier about the supply side of the equation.
Yep.
Because it's not just about the demand side, it's about the supply side. And he's right that right now you cannot build for under, let's say, $200 a square foot.
Yeah. And prices of materials have went up significantly too.
Labor, materials, everything.
Everything's going up with building new.
That's right. So what that means is that builders have to build larger properties and more expensive properties in order to make a profit. So what you see is like in Phoenix as an example, you go up to North Scottsdale and you see a lot of new building up there. You see a lot of new homes being built, but these are 3,000 square foot homes. These are 4,000 square foot homes that they're selling for 1.2 million. You go down into a normal neighborhood where the homes are maybe 1,200 square feet, just a nice little simple, I call them starter homes, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. None of those are being made because the builders can't make them at a profit. Right. So if I had to buy real estate right now, I would definitely want to buy a starter home because the builders can't make any more of the supply there. Prices have to go up even higher in order for them to build more of what you own.
Okay. So is that basically the takeaway here is residential is probably looking pretty good right now?
Well, not just residential, the starter homes.
Okay.
So now I'm not saying going into a C neighborhood or the ghetto or the hood or you want to call it.
Yeah.
That's a whole different story. I'm talking about going into an A neighborhood in like a small market, like maybe Kansas City where price is a little bit lower, and buying a 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,000, 1,200 square foot home in a good school district. You got to understand that you're playing with fire because you're still buying into a housing bubble, but your downside there is far lower. Okay. And now what happens is when we talk about real estate, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers are interested in real estate investing, you've got to include the debt. That's very, very, very important because if you can buy that property that's positive cash flowing with 30-year fixed rate debt, that's a completely different dynamic, totally different. Because what happens is in an inflationary environment, you're paying down your debt with devalued dollars. So that's a transfer of wealth from the borrower to the lender. That's right. So let me give you an example so everyone's on the same page here.
Okay.
Let's just say that you bought a house today for $100,000.
Yep.
And you used 100% financing.
Okay.
And you didn't have to make any payments, any monthly payments. You just had to make a balloon payment in 10 years. So you pay back all $100,000 in 10 years.
Okay.
And let's just say that right now a loaf of bread costs $1.
Okay.
So basically we could say your house can buy you 100,000 loaves of bread.
Okay.
That's the house's purchasing power.
Okay.
And again, it's all about goods and services. So now let's fast forward 10 years and say that we do have hyperinflation. And now a loaf of bread costs $100,000. wages would be up, everything would the prices would all rise of stuff. There's not more stuff. The prices have just risen, right? So people would be making, whatever, $1 billion a year if the price of bread is $100,000 a loaf. But see, you could pay back your entire home loan with the cost of one loaf of bread. But think about it. Your house is still worth 100,000 loaves of bread.
Okay.
See, so your house can still buy, if you were to sell your house
Yeah.
at whatever the price would be, you can still buy 100,000 loaves of bread, but all you have to do is give the bank one loaf of bread.
Okay.
You see, so what happens is the additional 99,999 loaves of bread is purchasing power that was transferred from the bank to you.
Okay.
Another way that we could say it is, let's just to take it to a further extreme, is let's say that that's $100,000, and let's say the value of the dollar goes to zero.
Okay.
Literally goes to zero. Like Venezuela, it's like toilet
Useless.
paper. Useless. You got it. Basically, you just got that house for free.
Bam. Okay.
But that house still has value. You could still sell the house.
Yeah.
And buy a lot of stuff, right? So that house was just basically the bank gave you that house.
Gotcha. So is real estate, I guess, with the volatility of the market right now, a good place to store your money to ensure that it's not going to get eaten up?
If you know what you're doing. I mean,
Okay.
we were talking before about how you've got a few properties, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you've probably got a 30-year fixed rate loan. That's the key, 30-year fixed rate.
On
You
all
don't
of them,
want to
yeah.
do adjustable rate mortgages or
Yeah.
anything. But if you've got a 30-year fixed rate and you got good, positive cash flow, that's another thing. If you got negative cash flow, that's not what you want,
Yeah.
because that puts you in a very compromising position if prices go down or if you have an occupancy issue. But if you've got a solid property, good neighborhood, and you've got good property management, like you've got your father,
Mhm.
that's a good situation to be in, right?
Okay.
Because what's going to happen now, even though the equity in your house, the price might go down, okay, but you're probably going to be increasing your purchasing power on the debt side of the equation by paying back the debt with cheaper dollars. So let me give you an exact example using your rental property. Let's say you've got a rental property
Mhm.
where your mortgage payment right now
Mhm.
is $500.
Okay.
Okay. And your rents, let's say, are $1,000 a month.
Mhm.
All right. Well, if we have inflation that goes to significant, severe inflation, your rents, let's say, go up to $10,000 a month.
Mhm.
Right. And it's not, but everyone's payments the price just adjusts, right? But your mortgage payment is still 500.
Yep.
You see, so you're collecting 10,000 in rent,
Yep. But we're still paying that historical price that we got.
but
it
your
at
mortgage
in the
payment
beginning.
didn't go up. Your
Yeah.
mortgage payment's still the same.
Yep.
So that's what we're saying there in economic terms, is you're paying back that loan with devalued dollars. So that's basically $9,000
Mhm.
that you didn't have before coming in from that property
Bam.
that you own with that $500 a month payment.
Gotcha.
You see, that's where the magic happens with real estate. So as long as you go into
Fixed rate.
this real estate market, understanding that you're playing with fire, you're understanding that you're buying at all-time highs. But what you have to do is, going back to that balance sheet thing that we were talking about, we have assets on our balance sheet and we have liabilities. Before, in a normal market, let's say prior to the late 1990s, the property was always the asset on your balance sheet and the debt was always the liability.
Mhm.
But now I think it's the reverse.
No.
That's
Okay.
how you have to look at it. The property is your liability. The debt is your asset,
Gotcha.
meaning that there's a good chance that you lose purchasing power with that property because you're buying at all-time highs prices. But there's a good chance too that you increase your purchasing power to a greater degree with the debt that you have by taking advantage of inflation
Mhm.
and paying the debt back with cheaper dollars. You just got to think of it as though it's switched. The
Yeah.
property is the liability, the debt's the asset. If you
Yeah.
think about it as the property as the asset and debt the liability, then I think people would be prone to make mistakes.
Mm.
So knowing that is basically the inverse, and on top of that, we're in a housing shortage for that type of home you described earlier, 3, 2s, whatever, family homes, etc.
Starter homes, that's
Starter
right.
homes.
So if someone's interested in real estate, focus on the starter homes. Don't focus on
Is
the
duplex count as a
million
starter
dollar.
home?
Oh,
Or triplex?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Those are
Residential.
Multifamily?
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are fantastic. But
Yeah.
don't sit there and look at a $800,000 or $1 million house in Scottsdale
Yeah.
and think that you're making a good investment.
Oh, hell no.
Or, or maybe a $4 million condo here in Miami or something like that, and think that you're making a good investment because the price is always just going to go up using cash. That's a bad
So let
idea.
me, just so the audience can understand. So what I'm getting from this, and then we'll move on to crypto real quick. So real estate, to build property right now is extremely expensive.
That's right.
So the construction companies are emphasizing doing big commercial projects to make more money.
To make money, period.
Exactly. Okay, to basically, to make some kind of profit.
To
Because
live.
building small homes
No
is not
profit.
going to make them the same money.
Nope, no profit, no money.
Yeah. Or maybe even lose.
Yeah. So the way I can say that is if it's $250 to build right now, you can buy that starter home for $200 a square foot.
Okay.
But if it costs $250 a square foot to build, they're never going to build until the prices go up to $250.
Bam.
So,
So
or
they're
if they're building at a loss.
So so the construction companies are prioritizing the big commercial projects. The single family homes, the starter homes are not being prioritized right
Correct.
now. However, those are in a shortage.
Correct.
So if something does happen, you'll at least have properties that, I guess, what did I say? Supply and demand.
Supply and demand.
Yeah.
Demand is high.
Yeah, and another
supplies
thing.
it there.
Yeah, and another thing that if you have a rental property, your main concern is rent. It's not really the price of the property. You're just buying the cash flow. So that's what
Exactly.
you're most concerned with, right? So I always look at it as kind of like a totem pole.
Okay.
And the starter homes are at the bottom of the totem pole.
Mhm.
So you've got your person that can afford, let's say, $5,000 a month in rent at the
Mhm.
top, then 4,000, 3,000. Then you got your person at the bottom that can afford $1,000 a month in rent. That's renting that starter home from you. Okay. Let's say we go through a massive recession. Let's say we go through the Great Depression or some sort of collapse in 2022 or 2023. Everyone is not going to lose their job.
Yeah.
Even in the Great Depression, the unemployment rate was only 25%, right? So that means that people are just going to ratchet down their ability to pay.
Expenses.
So the person
Bam,
that could
okay.
afford the $5,000 a month now can afford $2,000.
Gotcha.
See, but you're always at the bottom. So the only way you won't have a renter is if there are no renters.
Bam.
Yeah.
So you're at a level so low that they, even if people are downsizing, they're probably going to
Downsize into you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay,
right.
that's
well
fantastic
said.
explanation, man. So I hope you guys got that. And so, real quick, Chris, I'll hit some of these real fast, and then we'll hit crypto.
Yeah, no problem.
No, man, guys, like the goddamn video if you guys are enjoying this content, man, because you guys are getting a lot of gems right now. Hell, I'm even learning,
Bro.
because I had a whole strategy. I was going to get into commercial. Now I'm thinking like, no, I need to stick with the residential now at this point with the duplex and everything, because I literally had a meeting earlier where I was talking about like, hey, should we do are apartment complexes and stuff safe right now too, or should we be?
It depends. Like with Kenny, for sure, because Kenny's an expert. Kenny manages over $1 billion of real estate.
Uh-huh.
So if you're that good and you've been doing this for 25, 30 years, however long Kenny's been doing it, we're talking about Kenny McElroy, a good friend of mine. It's a YouTuber as well. Then
Okay.
it's
But
a
if you're
great opportunity.
less
And
experienced or whatever.
It depends where.
Okay.
If you're talking about an apartment complex here in Florida, that could be interesting. Apartment complex in LA, no thank you.
Gotcha.
Apartment complex in New York, no thank you.
Gotcha. Okay. Jose Perez, 2 more questions, George. Should I buy more puts? Also, George, you think we'll see negative interest rates? I know real rates are negative, but we're already behind. I think we talked about that earlier. Luis Molina, $2. What do you think about Bitcoin?
Coming
Gonna
up
hit that right now. Sorry. Justin Del Valle. Feel like none of this matters if you just buy and hold, at least when it comes to the market or property. Both have historically gone up since the dawn of society. Okay. And then John O'Driscoll, FNF, big kudos. GG is a special kind of genius. Question for George. FOI Fed report released recently about the 2008 crisis. The Fed bailed out the world to the amount of 30 trillion. Your thoughts? See you in June. Okay. So we'll talk about Bitcoin and then we'll hit that
question.
So one thing I think a couple of your super chats have hit on is the fact that, or the assumption that stocks and real estate always go up.
Okay.
Well, if I just buy the dip and wait, I'll be fine because stocks always go up. At the end of the day, even though we had the GFC, real estate always goes up. That is, you don't want to think that way. That's completely inaccurate.
Okay. 'Cause
That
I was under that premise. So, hey, I'm going to learn something new right now.
No, let me just give you an example of why that's not true. If I use a chart on my whiteboards all the time of housing in the United States adjusted for inflation going back to the year 1900. Okay, so if we start at 1900 and go all the way to the late 90s, we'll say 1997. So almost 100 years in the United States. How much did prices go up? What do you think? What would you guess?
Multiple
In
times.
100 years.
Multiple times.
What do you think, Larry?
Sorry, I was Chris distracting
No
me
problem. From 1900
Uh-huh.
to 1997. So almost 100 years in the United States. How much did prices go up just in general in the United States for the housing market?
here. More than maybe double or triple at this point? Quadruple?
Zero.
0. I thought it was a trick question.
Yeah.
He got us.
Zero.
And sorry, guys, I was taking Sun behind the scenes with Chris, but sorry.
So
go ahead.
so when you adjust for inflation,
Yeah.
housing prices were the exact same in 1997 as they were in 1900.
Okay. The key is taking into account inflation.
So that's right. Well, you have to do that because
Yeah.
we're talking about purchasing power. That's
course.
all we care about is purchasing power.
Yeah.
You know. So I mean, what's the best performing real estate market in the whole wide world? Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Does that mean that you want one of those properties? No, because they're denominated in bolivars. So you're losing your purchasing power, even though the nominal price is going through the roof, right? So housing prices really don't go up, or they shouldn't. If they do, then that means there's something wrong. That means the system is flawed. So why is that? Because home prices are directly tied to wages, as you would imagine, because you need wage to pay the mortgage. And then usually you've got a standard rate of interest, let's say 5-6% that we've seen historically, right? So if you look at that normal interest rate, you look at wages would have to go up in order for home prices to go up. And if wages are going up, usually that means inflation is going up at the same pace or even a little bit faster. So that's why when you adjust for inflation, it's basically adjusting for wages, the price of the homes have not changed. The only time they change is when we're in a massive bubble. Right. And now let's look at the stock market. Okay. Going back prior to 1981, because what happened in 1981? Well, that's when Paul Volcker raised interest rates, the Fed funds, which is now 0, up to 18%. 18%. Right. So since that time, we've been in a 40-year down cycle of interest rates. Okay. So you can't sit there and look at what stocks have done since 1981. Or what the real estate market has done since 1981 and say, this is going to happen for the next 40 years. This is going to happen indefinitely into the future. No. Because for the next 40 years, we could be in an upcycle in interest rates. So if we go from 0 back up to 18% over the next 40 years, I can promise you, whatever stocks did from 1981 to now, they will not do over the next 40 years. So then what you have to do is you have to look at the stock market prior to 1981, going through multiple interest rate cycles, down cycles and up cycles, and say, what happened to stocks? And there were multiple times when stocks actually went down. In fact, my memory serves me right. If you take out dividend payments, and again, you adjust for inflation, the stock market in like 1927 was basically the exact same as it was in 1981. You see, so people just look at the last couple decades and assume that that's going to be the same, or that's going to happen indefinitely into the future. And that is a fool's game. You cannot think that way. You've got to go back to 1900. You got to look at multiple cycles and then come to those conclusions. And another example I'd use is look at Japan. You know, in 1990, they had their huge bust, massive debt bubbles, exactly what we're seeing today in the United States. Their real estate market went down and down and down and down. 15 years later, it was still going down. Their stock market today in 2022 is lower than it was in 1990. You see? So this idea that stock markets just go up forever or real estate markets go up forever is a complete fallacy. That's just what financial planners tell you to get you to invest with them so they can basically rob you for fees. You know, and the Dave Ramsey types sit there and say, oh, well, you know, you just go back and look and the stock market always goes up. The stock market always goes up. And then they'll just show you a chart just going back to 1981. And you say, well, Mr. Financial Planner, well, what happened? Did a stock market exist before 1981? Oh, it did, didn't it? Yeah, I think it was a little older than that. Well, what happened before? You see, and that's what they never tell you.
So
Wow.
should people even bother getting in if it's not actually really appreciating, or is it
It
just a
depends.
good place to get in just to park your money
Well,
somewhere?
You already know that answer, right? It depends. You don't say, is the price going up or down? Is it cheap or is it expensive?
Based
So-
on
That's
So the
simple. So
mindset
then you go and
shifts.
look at the PE ratios.
Yeah.
Right now, the stock market is just the S&P 500, let's say, or the NASDAQ.
Uh-huh.
It's very expensive, historically speaking. Very expensive. So you don't buy. But if the stock market gets really cheap,
Like now.
or well, not now, it's not cheap now, but if in the future it may be cheap if the stock market crashes.
You don't think the crash brought it down a little bit as far as like stocks going down in price?
You talk about the crash of 2020?
Oh no, right now at this moment.
Yeah.
Or like
no,
last
no,
week,
no,
I
no.
guess, when it
Oh,
really got
not
hit.
even close, Myron. It's still at nosebleed levels.
Okay, so
Wow.
still high.
Oh, it's still in bubble territory for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you look at March of 2020 as an example.
Yeah.
Now there were some things that got really cheap. I don't know if you guys were following it, but oil actually got negative.
I remember that.
Oil went to negative $38 a barrel, in the futures market. It's not like you could buy a barrel of oil for negative money, but so that's an example of something getting real cheap. And the spot price got down, I think maybe the main price of oil got down. I think it was under, let's just say $20 a barrel or something. So if you look at a long-term chart of oil adjusted for inflation, going back as far as you can, you see that when it gets under 30 a barrel, it becomes pretty cheap. Kind of the median price is right around, $65. So when it's getting 30, it's pretty cheap. Now when it's getting 80, 85, it's getting kind of expensive. So all that means is that when you or your viewers ever see oil go under $30 a barrel, it's a good time to buy because
Okay.
it's cheap. So just buy a good oil producer that's going to pay you a good dividend. That's one thing I love to do, is just getting paid to own something.
Yep.
I want to be, if I'm going to own something, if I'm going to buy it, I want to get paid to own it.
Okay.
And so that's a dividend paying stock or real estate,
Yeah.
right? But that's an example of buying something when it's cheap and I bought a lot of oil producers back in March of 2020, but I thought oil was going down even further. Honestly, I thought the price was going down, but I still bought. Why? Because I'm not trying to time the market. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to figure out the price direction. I'm not trying to figure out the top or the bottom. I'm just asking myself a simple question. Is it cheap? And if it's cheap, I buy it. If it's expensive, I sell it. Real estate, 2012, the cash flow, it's cheap. So I was buying everything I possibly could. For the last 2 or 3 years, I've been selling. In fact, just the other day, I sold my last property in the United States. Now, are real estate prices going to go up? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's in a bubble, but it could quadruple from here. Who knows? But I don't care, because if it's expensive now, I'm going to sell. You do just stick to those
That simple
those
premise,
rules,
yeah.
and then what that does is that gives you an edge.
Mm.
And if you have a mathematical edge, then you now are the house. If you're playing a casino,
Yeah.
right? You're the house.
Yeah.
They have a mathematical edge.
Yep.
So then the law of large numbers is on your side. So the only thing you have to do to make sure you come out ahead is just stay in the game, because you have that mathematical edge.
Wow. So basically, the mindset of just saying, "Hey, you know what? Just buy and hope for it to go up," isn't going to follow. But you're saying, look for the cheap prices when it's cheap, and buy when it's
And
cheap,
then hold
and then hold.
till it gets expensive,
And
and
then
then
sell.
sell.
That's pretty simple. It's profound but simple.
Buy
Yeah.
low, sell high.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So crypto, real quick. What are your thoughts on that? Is it something that people should get into? Is it going to protect them from this inflation and all those other crazy
Metaverse,
things we have?
NFTs.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, just using that framework, you have to decide, let's use Bitcoin as an example, is it cheap or is it expensive? And so crypto gets very difficult there because it doesn't produce cash flow, and you
Yeah.
don't have a lot of historical reference, adjusted for inflation and everything. So I think that everyone should own Bitcoin. I don't know, the other cryptos I don't really like.
Ethereum.
It's okay. But I think that everyone should own Bitcoin. Why? Not necessarily because the price is going to $100,000 or $1 million or anything, but I think that everyone should hold some purchasing power outside of the banking system,
Okay.
especially like guys like you, because you guys are, your podcast is all about, the ladies and making money and, kind of what it's like to be a guy in today's world. But you guys say some things that are unpopular with the CNN types.
That's a fact.
Right? We all do.
Yeah.
We all do. right? So we're going into a very scary environment of censorship, as an example. And this
Yeah.
is one thing that I say all the time. If you look back throughout history, the people that have been in favor of censorship, when have they been the good guys?
Never.
Never really. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
They're always the bad guys.
Yeah.
So think about how many people that are in charge, politically or in the mainstream media that are pushing for censorship of podcasts, just like this one.
Yep.
That trend is going to continue. Even if we get the survey sickness behind us, I think it's only a matter of time before there's another crisis that they try to take advantage of. You never let a good crisis go to waste.
Of course.
And so I think that they want to control us. They want to control the
Facts.
narrative. They want to control what people say,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if they don't like what you guys are saying, why wouldn't they come in and say, Fresh, you're a danger to society because of your words. We
So they're
don't
doing to
like
Joe
your
Rogan
ideas.
right now.
That's right.
So
That's
they're doing
right.
to Joe.
That's
It's
right. This
funny.
is a
At
great
At this
example.
moment, they're doing that to Joe Rogan.
On Facebook, if you
Great
put up
example.
a video, right, that is not in their guidelines or their community standards, and they find it offensive or some people don't report it enough, they just say, hey, you know what? This is considered a bad practice for the platform, and they just delete it.
Yeah, and then I think the next step for them is to look like at a Joe Rogan
Mhm.
and say, well, what he's saying is so dangerous that we should consider him a domestic terrorist.
Right.
And if he's a domestic terrorist, well, then we have to seize his bank account.
And if it's
It's
all
all-
digits
it's all-
and no cash, you can't do anything.
That's right.
Control.
So now what would happen in that scenario if Joe Rogan had some Bitcoin or if he owned some physical gold, something like that outside of the banking
he
system?
could barter.
You see, he would still have purchasing power. Right.
Mm.
So it's kind of like just setting up a plan B. And I don't want people to lose sleep over it. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but today
You never know.
it's something we have to be cognizant of.
Yeah.
It's not a zero probability. So you got to think, what's the downside of having a plan B? Well, there is none. So especially when you're in your business
Mhm.
or like Rogan, if you're making YouTube videos or content, or even if you're not, I think at some point in time, you may be in those crosshairs. And so it's good. And that's one main reason why I like Bitcoin. But going back to pricing it, I think that
So why Bitcoin and not like Ethereum or whatever? Is it because it follows it's kind of in tandem with the NASDAQ? Is it a little bit more stable in your opinion? Like, is there a particular reason why Bitcoin and not the other coins?
yeah, I mean, I could go on for that for a long, long time, but it's basically kind of sound money. And I like sound, you can't create more of it. I could go into the
Okay.
tech, but the people who understand Austrian economics or the principles of sound money and basically the government not being able to create more of it, you want a cryptocurrency that they can't create more of it.
Okay.
Okay.
And then there's other advantages as well. But that's why I favor Bitcoin. But
Mhm.
again, I don't really think you should. I'm not saying go out and buy it because it's going to 100,000 like most people. I say
Yeah.
buy it regardless of what happens to the price
Gotcha.
because you need something outside of the banking
Bam.
system. That's just a great smart plan B, right? So then the question becomes, okay, well, when do you buy?
Mhm.
And so we talked about buying things when they're cheap and selling them when they're expensive. But what I also like to do as far as looking at a catalyst is I like to buy things when there's panic and sell
And chaos.
hysteria, right? Buy panic, sell hysteria. And so your timing. So look at Bitcoin right now. Is there panic in the market? Well, when it was getting down close to 30,000,
Yeah, there was.
there was a little bit of panic there.
I remember
right?
when Elon Musk made that announcement and
It
everyone
shot up.
shot up. Just one article on what he said, it just shot up the price of
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
But let's also look at the flip side. Let's look at when Bitcoin was at 65, 68,000
Yeah, I
a
remember
few
that.
months ago.
Yeah.
You heard it everywhere. Every single podcast was talking about,
Yeah.
the athletes started to get some of their salary in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
When you see that, that's hysteria.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen at the bottom of a market. That happens at the top. You guys are probably too young to remember, but I going back to probably 2011 or so, the dollar was very weak against the euro. The euro is the European
I remember
currency, okay? And I remember Jay-Z came out with a song, and I can't remember which one it was, but part of the lyrics, how he's always talking about how rich he is,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, of course.
And part of the lyrics was basically saying, I'm paraphrasing, but he was saying that he is so rich that he's only being paid in euros.
Euros.
Mm.
When you see stuff like that, that's a contrarian indicator, and you need to take the opposite side of that.
Gotcha.
So if Jay-Z is talking about getting paid in euros, short the euro.
Yeah.
If Jay-Z or XYZ football player is talking about getting paid in Bitcoin, hold off on buying more Bitcoin.
So
Yeah.
NFTs kind of same thing. Is a hype.
Absolutely.
Is a hype.
Okay.
Absolutely. Now, I'm not saying that that Bitcoin or cryptos, let's say, or NFTs aren't the future.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, listen, if we go back to the late 90s, we look at the dot-com bubble. It's not that the internet wasn't the future. It's just that those businesses had no business being in business. They weren't making money. It was totally unsustainable. The prices were way, way, way too high. There was hysteria, right? Then what happened when the dot-com bubble burst? There was panic. So you want to sell the hysteria and you want to
Mm.
buy the panic with that long-term view. You know, if you have a long-term view that cryptocurrency is the future, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. But when you're adding to your position, just make sure you're doing so when there's panic in the market and not when there's hysteria. When you go and all your buddies are talking about buying crypto this or crypto that, and you go, I remember I was at the golf course a few months ago, and I was there hitting on the driving range, right? And there was a group of college guys in front of me and behind me, and they were sitting there talking about how they're up trading cryptocurrency until like 2 o'clock in the morning. That's not when you want to buy,
Right.
right? That's when you want to hold off on your position. Now when it goes under, here's another example on the opposite side. Remember when it got down to near 30,000 and you started seeing those memes on Twitter with what's the guy that is famous for buying all the crypto? He's the CEO of I think it's Micro Technologies, Michael Saylor.
Mhm.
And there were all these memes of him working at McDonald's.
That's
Because
when you buy.
Yeah.
That's when you think, maybe not buy, but
But-
that's when you say, that's interesting. That's interesting. Let's follow this
Mhm.
and see if there's more panic here. When you start to see something called capitulation, where everyone sells and says, oh, this Bitcoin was the worst thing I've ever bought in my life. It's going to go down forever. When Jim Cramer comes out and says, oh, well, this is uninvestable. That's when you want to say,
Take a look.
So precious metals, what's your thoughts on it? Gold, silver, good hedge against the issues that we got with inflation. Should people get into it? Is it worth it?
Yeah,
What's your thoughts on
so my portfolio, I always call it a 10-80-10. So 10% would be insurance, and I think that's physical gold. You're not trying to get rich. You're just trying to maintain some purchasing power right there. And throughout 5,000 years, gold has been has done that well, right? So again, you're not trying to buy gold because it's going to go to 10,000 and you're going to become a gold billionaire
Millionaire.
or anything like that.
Hmm.
No, you're just maintaining the purchasing power, maybe an offset to your cash position.
Yeah.
Now, 80% of the portfolio is what I call investments. Now, I just define that as things that pay you to own them. Right?
Okay.
So that would be a dividend paying stock.
Okay.
That would be your real estate,
Yeah.
your positive cash flowing real estate.
Mhm.
That's a very safe bet, because whatever the price does, you don't care as long as you're getting paid.
Mhm.
You can afford to wait. You're never a motivated seller, and that's a great position to be in, right?
Gotcha.
And the other 10% of the portfolio I like in speculative assets.
Okay.
And so what I mean there is it might not pay you to own it, but you think there's good asymmetry. So maybe if Bitcoin were to go down to, let's say, 20,000 again, and you see that panic and you think, boy, the upside here might be 200 grand, and there's a lot of panic. It's very unloved. I think my risk reward there is very good, but it's not paying you to own it. That would be a good example of a speculation. Same thing going back to 2020, March, I bought a lot of uranium.
Okay.
So that those producers weren't paying me. I wasn't getting a dividend, but I bought some uranium, an ETF. Now on the investment side,
Okay. You bought a uranium ETF.
yeah, correct. Another thing I bought back then was coal. So this is a great example of how you really, really make money in the market, is you buy what is absolutely unloved. And this kind of goes back to the gold miners,
Silver.
So, well, the gold miners are unloved right now, but you guys probably don't remember this, but back in the mid 90s, the tobacco companies were under a massive amount of pressure. They were getting sued right and left.
I remember because
Right and
they were
left.
putting commercials out like crazy. Hey, surgeons warning, smoking is bad. I remember in
Yeah,
my
the
childhood.
government came down on them, and they had to pay out billions and billions and billions of dollars, and they had all these regulations,
Yeah,
right? So
I remember.
everyone thought that tobacco was dead. No pun intended. Tobacco is uninvestable,
Yeah.
as Jim Cramer would say,
Mhm.
right? Well, all that did is just create a moat around the existing tobacco companies. So what they did is they didn't have any competition. So they're like, this is incredible. So the demand stayed the same because they grew, into other areas, into emerging markets. And when people make more money, they eat poorly, they smoke, they do these things. So they had the demand stay the same, but the supply side coming into the market got incredibly constricted, and it was just basically monopolized. So if you look at the industries in the stock market, one of the best performing industries, if not the best, when you account for reinvesting dividends, has been tobacco since the mid 90s. It's not Facebook, it's not tech, it's not these, it's tobacco.
Literally, I just had a light bulb hit me. I remember as a kid, because my dad smokes, I'm trying to get him off it. But I remember him complaining about the price going up significantly for a pack of cigarettes in the 90s, because they were doing all this stuff with commercials like, don't smoke, it's bad for you. They put the surgeon warning stuff in there. Restaurants started telling people you can't smoke in here.
Yeah.
There was like this huge push to demonize tobacco. And now that you're mentioning it, like I remember it vividly. And my dad would always complain, because this is back in like, mid, late 90s. He was like, man, the cigarettes are expensive. It's like $5 a pack, which back then was like crazy.
Yeah.
So,
And everyone thought that would crush the tobacco companies.
It actually helped.
It was the exact opposite.
Wow.
Nothing you could have done could have been better for the tobacco companies. So my point now is, I think the new tobacco.
Backfired.
Yeah. Well,
the
I think
G.
the new tobacco is coal.
Okay.
So you think of coal today, and it's uninvestable. We've got
Why
green
so? Why is
energy, we've got ESG. Oh,
Okay.
that coal's a dirty fuel. It's dirty. No one can invest in
Tesla's
that.
going to take over.
Oh, Tesla's going to do this. We're going to have electric cars by 2030 and all
Yes.
these things. But that's people don't understand. Coal's the same thing. You've got all these emerging markets. They're going to need coal. Even if we do a Green New Deal, you guys have heard about that. Or Build Back Better.
What's the
right?
coal ETF real quick? Do you know it? I'm about to
Well,
look
it
at
was
this.
KOL, but
Okay.
that they dismantled that. So yeah, don't look at coal, but you can just look at coal ETF, and
Okay.
I'm sure there's.
I'm going to look that up after this.
Yeah, what I can do is I'm happy to give you guys a free membership to Rebel Capitalist Pro, and that's my online investing portal, and
sure.
I'll just give you guys a free membership, and you guys can check out. We got a lot of coal companies in there,
Awesome.
but
Cool. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. But that is a good example of something that was very unloved, that was paying you an epic amount to own it. I remember back in March of 2020, that ETF was still there. And I was buying it very cheap because coal was going down along with everything else.
With
and
the gas prices as well and everything.
Plus, it had already been crushed because of this ESG movement, right? That I was getting paid 15% dividend.
What?
15%. Right. And since
That's unheard of.
Yeah. And before they dismantled it, it went up like it quadrupled or maybe quadrupled in price while I owned it, while I was being paid a 15% dividend.
That
yield.
shit's on even real estate ETFs.
That's what you want to do. That's buying things when they are cheap, buying things when they're unloved. So going back to your question, Fresh, about gold and gold miners, I'm not buying gold mine. Now, gold I would buy regardless, just because that's an insurance policy. So I don't worry about the price there. But the gold miners, I think, could be a very good speculation. And I'm not buying them right now, but I'm very interested, because they're very unloved, and everyone says gold is dead and crypto is going to take over, and it's not an inflation hedge anymore. And when people start talking like that, that's when you want to
pay attention,
get interested, put them on your watch list, and watch how, especially if we get a crash in the stock market moving forward, the gold price will most likely plummet, taking down the gold miners, and that would be a great, at least for me, that would be a great buying opportunity.
Wow. So what about silver? Thoughts on silver?
Same thing.
Similar?
Yes. Yeah, I don't look at it as insurance. I look at it as more of a speculative asset.
Okay.
But so, the mining companies, I just put them all in the same group.
Okay. So silver is a little bit more speculative. Gold, stable, safe.
Yeah, gold is just the insurance policy, physical gold. Yeah.
Okay. Damn, man. Yo, guys, I hope you like this goddamn video right now, because there's so much game being dropped right now. I'm not even looking at the monitor. I'm just paying so much attention. Real quick, I'll hit these. And we got to get going here. We might go right into the Q&A, because I know George's got to catch a flight here, guys. He's actually here in between flights, so thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
by
going
the
to
way.
Medellin,
Colombia.
One of your guys' favorite.
Finally,
places.
somebody that speaks my language. Everybody take notes. I'm a scientist. LOL. Cool. Quest all day. I'm gonna be real though. Coming from where I'm from, going from paying rent to owning an investment property has changed my mindset for life. Bam.
Good job.
Anime, red pill. So real estate is for maintaining wealth, and crypto is for generating it. On the right line of thinking, GG.
Sorry.
He said here,
Is
we'll start the Q&A
real
questions. then.
estate for maintaining wealth versus crypto is for generating wealth?
Real estate, if you know what you're doing, you can make a lot of money there. Like Kenny is an example. He's made a lot of money in real estate. So is Kiyosaki. For you guys, you could make a lot of money. You can use leverage. It's good. But I think for maintaining wealth, I think gold is really, really good for that.
Okay.
Okay.
Hold on. One second, guys. I'm trading mode.
Right now, Chris?
No, not right now, but there we go. Superchats. Go.
Okay. So,
Another thing that I
go ahead.
might be able to go over for your listeners quickly is just a small, and I think this may be, I think a lot of people listen to this and say, okay, well, what if I don't have any money to invest? This is all great if I've got $10,000 or $50,000 or $1 million or whatever. But I'm not that guy. I'm making $20 an hour, $50 an hour, and I'm able to save a little bit of money every single month, but I don't have that big wad of cash that I can start investing and kind of playing in this game. So I retired in 2012, but I've always kind of been, I'm the big brother, and my younger brother was having some health issues back in 2017. So long story short, I had to move him out to Tucson, and I went out there to help him. Well, I had nothing to do because all my real estate projects were being managed by my team down there. I didn't really need to get involved.
Awesome.
So I was just bored out of my mind. So long story short, what I started to do is I started to get involved with RVs and Airstreams and these trucks. I didn't know anything about trucks, but I went out and bought one just to pull one of the Airstreams.
Like a tractor trailer type joint?
No, like
truck?
F-150, Ford F-150.
Oh, okay.
And then it turned out that F-150 was no good for my trailer. It wasn't powerful enough. So I sold it like 2 days or 3 days, something like that. It took me to sell it on Craigslist. And I made like $3,000 on it, right? Because I kind of fixed it up, took good pictures of it and stuff. I thought, my goodness, this is, wow, how did I do that? So I started researching these particular trucks, and it turns out that they're in very high demand. It's this from basically 1995 to 2002, these Ford trucks. So I started teaching myself more and more and more about it. And I got to the point where I started with, I had a lot of money in the bank, but I maybe just started with $20,000, $30,000. I was buying these trucks, and I was buying them on Craigslist in areas around the country with no rust. That's key. Because all the areas on the East Coast, they rust out easy, right? Jersey and Ohio and places like Minnesota. So these trucks were in very, very high demand because of the motor. And so I would go buy them off of people on Craigslist in California where gas was very expensive. And then I'd take them and I'd take great pictures of them. That's key. And I'd put them up on eBay to where you have a national market. And I'd almost double my money on every truck. Almost
eBay
every
game.
truck.
There you go.
Yeah, and so what's really cool about that is if you've got a lot of your viewers or listeners who are interested maybe one day in being a Kenny McElroy, getting involved with real estate, when you're doing that with cars or trucks or tennis shoes it's the same game. If you can do that with cars or trucks, you can do it with real estate.
Yep.
Because it's just managing subcontractors, it's buying low, it's negotiating, it's improving, and then selling to the highest bidder. So, but the great thing about that is people can do it, and the barrier of entry is far lower.
Yeah.
Some
Versus real
guy's
estate.
watching this right now that's got $10,000. He can do that. If you can just, I think Gary Vee talks about this a lot. A side hustle where you're just buying things at a local level where what the price should be, and that seller doesn't, and you're selling it on eBay and pocketing the spread. I start off, and within probably 3 or 4 months, I was probably making 20, 30 grand a month. Just because I was
Flipping
bored,
trucks.
just bored,
in
bored,
Arizona.
nothing to do. And so I think, and then if I hadn't have, if I didn't have any experience prior to that, then what I would have taken away from that is not only making $100,000 quickly that you could then take and start investing and doing the things that we're talking about, but also you get the education to where if you want to start investing in real estate, well, now you know the game because you've been doing it with all these $2,000 and $3,000 cars. You see?
Gotcha.
And so I think that's a great thing for people to do that are trying to build up enough money to start investing.
Okay,
That's
so we'll get
very good tip there.
shotgun round here, guys, with questions. So real estate is for,
Yeah.
okay, read that one.
Moby the Whale?
Moby the Whale. Finally, someone said I studied economics in college and was luckily to have a professor that broke this down. Everyone wants to push you stocks and real estate without looking at the historical picture and rules of money. Cool. $20, keep chilling. Which stock do you know pays dividends monthly? Well, we just talked about that with Coal, and I know the real estate ones also pay pretty good dividends, but 15% is unheard of. Wow. Hanun Ali, fire episode, what's your thoughts on the construction housing purchases in the United States? We talked about that. Clip what he just said on censorship, straight facts. Great show. And that's from Nobunaga with $100. Thank you so much.
Oh,
And then Nobunaga again, George is a magical man. Censorship. Thank you so much, Nobunaga. Appreciate that greatly, man. And then last one, Daniel A, $20. Great, all the way from GBP, Great Britain. George is a legend. George is a legend. Glad to see him on the show. So, what are some of these questions that came in, Chris?
Yeah, I put in Telegram.
So we'll run through a
I'm
speed
sure we
round,
answered
guys.
some of them too. You know.
We gotta be quick.
Yeah. Okay, so we got one here. It goes. Okay, thoughts on Divvy Homes rent-to-own program as a way to get into real estate?
I'm not sure about that particular program.
Okay.
I think rent to own. I'd prefer getting a loan from a bank because you're not able to take advantage of the 30-year fixed rate loan. And remember, the property is the liability, the debt's the asset. So you're basically buying it without the asset.
Cool. Thoughts on Chinese debt, 100 trillion, and real estate companies? And this is from Estacada Riches. Are you aware of Tether USDT being basically digital fiat money and thus overinflating the crypto market, BTC and ETH?
Sure, I think it's possible. I mean, I do not like Tether.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of Tether because they're hiding basically what's on their balance sheet, what they've purchased with all the dollars that people have actually given them, or they say there's a 1-to-1 ratio. I don't know what assets they have, and I know those assets can go down in value. Now, whether or not they've created more tethers than they've actually taken in with dollars, or there's more tethers out there than assets on their balance sheet as far as the nominal value, I don't know.
Okay.
I know many people have made that claim, and that's what your viewer is referring to. But even if they're not creating more demand through kind of bogus, fake tethers, if you will, I don't like Tether from the standpoint of no one knows what's on their balance sheet. No one knows that they won't really disclose that. They won't let people audit it, and that's for me, it's always a red flag.
Okay. Justin Deval. Hey, George, quick question. Got 800K sitting in a low cost total market index fund, Vanguard. Should I keep it all there or spend it elsewhere? I'm 27, by the way, live in New York. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give anyone individual investment advice because I don't know his situation. I don't know how much he's making with his job. I don't know a lot of these things. But if it were me, I would not want my $800,000 in a Vanguard fund in the stock market. Absolutely no chance.
No.
All right.
Okay. Saint REI, what's the ideal picks for Vanguard Roth account?
Yeah, so again, I don't think there's any ideal picks. I don't know what they'll let you buy, but you just got to buy things that are cheap. So the only thing that I know that's cheap right now and I'm not buying it, I've just got it on a watch list, are foreign stocks. There's not too many domestic stocks that I think are cheap with a good PE ratio or in an industry or a market that's really gotten beaten down. One thing that I'm trying
to even getting maybe like indexes or ETFs that follow the S&P 500 or that follow the total stock market, are those not good bets right now? Or
no, well, the stock market's at all-time high or almost all-time highs.
Yeah.
The stock market's in a bubble, so that would be expensive. So you're doing the opposite. You're buying when things are expensive, and unfortunately, most likely when you do that, you're going to sell it when it's cheap.
Okay.
Now, one thing I like right now is Russia. You might be able to find a good ETF on Russia. And the reason I say that is because remember, now we are talking about panic, right?
But wouldn't right now be considered the dip and we're buying into the dip, or is that something
with Russia?
No. I mean, with like the stock market in general, like as far as like, because things have plummeted obviously with individual stocks and everything.
Right.
Like that.
So, but let's look at PE ratios, right? So that's just basically price to earnings or how much you're paying for the stock market, right? Or the Buffett indicator is a very good example of this.
Okay.
That's just the stock market compared to GDP. So, when a stock is kind of historically priced normally, you're looking at maybe a 15 PE ratio. So the stock market trading at a 15 PE ratio. So
what's PE stand for?
So basically, if you've got $1 million in earnings, I'm willing to pay you $15 million for your company.
Okay.
Okay. So what we're at now is at almost all-time highs. So I think it was maybe a little higher in the .com, but let's just say now, I don't know right off the top of my head, but let's say it's at 30. So normally that $1 million in cash flow, the market would be willing to pay $15 million for it. Now they're willing to pay $30 million for it.
Okay.
That means it's way, way, way overpriced.
Damn.
See, way overpriced. It's just like let's just say this this condominium, right, is normally when the trend line going back to 1900,
Yeah.
right? Let's just say the price adjusted for inflation is usually $500,000, right? Now it's 1.5 million, let's
Mhm.
say. That's expensive.
Mhm.
That's super expensive. And so that's just what now Russia though, I'm not saying that Russia's cheap in general, but it's getting cheap because there's some panic there because you've got potentially an altercation, a war between the United States and Russia.
Mhm.
So that means everyone sells Russia. Well, if you're long term, if you're bullish on Russia for the next 20 or 30 years, regardless of whether we go into a war, that could present an opportunity where those stocks get really cheap. You know, go
Okay.
back to that old saying, you always want to buy when there's blood in the streets.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
When there's blood in the streets, it's time to eat, right? As they would say. Okay. So Jose Perez goes, 2 more questions, George. Should I buy more puts? Also, George, you think we'll see negative interest rates? I know real rates are negative, but we're already behind.
Yeah, so as far as puts, I mean, I don't want to get into that. That's
Whole other
I think
thing.
that's a little risky, and
Yeah.
you're kind of betting that the stock market's going to go down. I don't know if it's going to go down. Who knows? And again, see what you're doing there with the puts is you're trying to guess the direction.
Yeah.
You're trying to guess the price. Is the stock market going to go up or down?
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know. I just know that it's expensive.
Okay.
So that doesn't mean that you short it. It just means that you're playing with fire there. And I think that the options for most people, it's a little risky. But what was the second part of his question?
He goes, do you think we'll see negative interest rates?
Oh, okay. So negative nominal rates is what he's talking about.
Okay.
Um, boy, possibly. I let me say this. I think there's a higher probability that we see negative interest rates on Fed funds in the next 5 years than we see 5% interest rates.
Oh.
And I say 5% because that's kind of like normal
Yeah.
Fed funds. And, even though they're talking about hiking now, I think that, again, if you give me a 5-year window, that there's a higher probability that we're negative Fed funds than them actually just getting to 5%, which would be the normal.
Interesting how everything kind of like, if something happens here, it changes this. It's very interesting. Like, it's complex, but it's like, it's
You
very
gotta watch the
interesting.
news.
And
You
then
never know.
John O'Driscoll, FNF, big kudos. GG is a special kind of genius. Question for George. FOIA Fed report released
FOIA.
recently. Oh, yeah, FOIA. Okay. Fed report released recently about the 2008 crisis. The Fed bailed out the world to the amount of 30 trillion. Your thoughts? See you in June.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that specific FOIA
Mhm.
request and what they got, but yeah, I mean, the Fed came in with quantitative easing and doing everything that they did, and you could argue that that propped up the banks, the stock market, and everything else, which saved the entire global economy. There was a lot of contributing factors there that it would take me another podcast to go into.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, you could say that the Fed did that, but even if they did bail out the entire system, the only thing they did is kick the can down the road. And remember, it goes back to our analogy or example with the heroin addict.
There you go.
The only thing they did is give the heroin addict more heroin.
Mhm.
They didn't fix. He's not off the drug.
Yeah.
Right.
They just gave him more heroin, which eventually makes them worse.
Yeah. So, and this will be the last one, then we'll close the show, guys, because he's got to go. With everything that we talked about, the markets, real estate, inflation, the Fed, etc., what should people do today?
I think what they should do is look at the 10-year treasury.
Okay.
So to try to predict, if we're going to have a recession, because that's the big thing. We're talking about cross currents there.
Yeah.
If we have a big recession, that's a very, very powerful cross
Do you
current.
think it's coming?
That's why people have to watch the 10 years. So
Mm.
if you go back to 1950, every single time we've had a recession, we have had what they call an inverted yield curve. And every time we have an inverted yield curve, 100% of the time we have a recession. So what is an inverted yield curve? That's just if you look at the treasuries, they have different maturities. You have a 3-month treasury, a 1-year, a 2-year, a 10-year, a 30-year. What they usually do is they look at like the 1-year, the 2-year, and compare that with the interest rate on the 10-year. So as you guys can imagine, the longer you lend the government money or any entity, the higher your interest rate
Mhm.
because the more risk you're taking. If I give you a loan overnight compared to 10 years, I'm going to want a higher interest rate for that 10-year loan because I'm taking more risk, right? So what ends up happening though, in an environment where the market sees a recession coming, is the interest rate on the 10-year will go lower than the interest rate on the 2-year.
Okay.
Wow.
actually lower. So that happened the last time
Wow.
in August of 2019.
Okay.
What do we have in 2020?
Damn.
Recession. You know, what happened to GFC? You can go back to every single recession we've had in the United States, go back to 1950,
Mhm.
same thing. So if we think about the Fed raising interest rates at the short end of the curve, that's going to bring up the interest rate on the 1 year and on the 2 year. So then you got to pay attention to the 10-year, because if the 10-year goes up at the same rate, then we're not going to have an inverted yield curve, and the chance of a recession is very low.
Okay.
But if the 10-year doesn't go up, if it stays the same around 1.7, maybe 1.8, but the Fed raises up the rates here, then that could raise the 1 year, the 2 year above where the 10-year is. Then if we get that inversion, then there's almost a 100% chance that we get a recession. We get a recession, then that's going to see some serious economic pain, because again, remember, they can't, or it's harder for them to prop up the system, because now we have inflation. We don't have that low inflation environment. So that's when you see potentially the recession creating the stock market going down, housing market going down, unemployment going up and up and up and up. And you have that feedback loop where things just get worse and worse and worse.
Hold cash or buy assets then right now at this point with the volatility?
So I think you do both, because you want a diversified portfolio. But
Bam.
one thing I can tell you is, for my personal portfolio, I'm increasing my cash levels. So I'm increasing the level of cash as a percentage of my portfolio that I would typically have. So a little more dry powder.
Yeah.
Just
And we're
in
talking
case.
straight liquid, sitting in a bank somewhere ready to deploy.
Yeah, cash. So
Okay.
so if you
Yeah.
see if you see a March of 2020,
Mhm.
you've got cash to go in there and bam, take advantage of it when things are cheap.
Yeah, my
Okay.
my man just said just hold on for now and wait on some cash. So some
Yeah,
saved
and
up.
it's fortunately that the Fed and the government's put us in a very difficult position where there's a strong negative carry on cash, right? Because that cash position, you're losing purchasing power if we have inflation go up.
Yeah.
But the question is it worth it? Am I willing to pay? Let's just say we have 7% inflation. Am I willing to pay 7% per year to hold that cash position to take advantage of a stock market crash that goes down by, let's say, 30 or 40%? Do I think the probability of a stock market crash is that high where I'm willing to pay 7% to hold dry powder? And for me, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Bam.
Likewise.
Okay. So guys, that was
That was
awesome.
fire.
Holy crap, man. Don DeMarco. Don DeMarco.
I feel great.
The goddamn video, guys. This was probably one of the most informative podcasts we've
Very.
ever done, man. George, thank you so much for coming. I know you got a flight to catch.
Yeah,
Hey,
thanks for
George,
having me,
where can I
guys.
find you,
Where can
brother?
people find you, man? Please.
Oh, just my name. It's George, Gammon. Gammon is the way you spell my last name. Yeah, it's right there on the StreamYard thing.
Boom.
So if you just Google that, my 2 YouTube channels will come up. I've got a podcast called The Rebel Capitalist Show. And then, we do the live events, Rebel Capitalist Live. You'll find all that stuff if you just
June.
Google my name.
And if you guys thought this was informative, you need to watch his actual YouTube videos where he has a board and he shows it to you guys. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? It's amazing stuff. So, George, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks
All his
for
links
having
are
me.
below, guys. Subscribe to his channel. Follow him on Twitter. Follow him on Instagram. Fantastic, content creator,
Legend.
and hopefully we can have you, Kiyosaki, and McElroy here in one show, and we can
Kenny.
just do a whole Kenny.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
cool. Other than that, guys, we'll catch you back here in about three
Three
hours with our boy Brandon Carter to talk about making money in 2022. So thank you guys so much. Peace.
Peace.